Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The October wind whipped across Interstate 80 as Otis Bramble guided his Kenworth T680 through the desolate Wyoming landscape. The 38-year-old veteran trucker had been hauling freight for Midwest Transport for 15 years, and tonight's run from Chicago to Sacramento was routine cargo, industrial machinery parts that would pay enough to cover his truck payment and put some money aside for his daughter's college fund. The dashboard clock glowed 11:47 p.m. as Otis crested a gentle hill west of Cheyenne. He preferred night driving when traffic was light and the Wyoming emptiness stretched endlessly under star-filled skies. The only sounds were the steady rhythm of his Cummins engine and the occasional crackle of CB radio chatter from other drivers sharing the lonely highway. At mile marker 347, Otis noticed headlights in his mirrors. Not unusual on I-80, but something about their positioning caught his attention. The following vehicle maintained an exact distance of 3 car lengths behind his trailer, neither gaining nor falling back despite changes in terrain and speed. Otis adjusted his rearview mirror for a better look. The truck behind him appeared to be a dark Peterbilt, though the night made details difficult to discern. What he could see clearly were the headlights, unusually bright with a bluish tint that cut through the darkness like surgical beams. For the next 10 miles, the mysterious truck maintained its position with mechanical precision. When Otis slowed for a gentle curve, it slowed. When he accelerated on the straightaway, it matched his speed exactly. The consistency was unnerving. Breaker 19, this is Big O westbound at the 357, Otis transmitted on his CB. Got a driver behind me in a dark Pete. You got your ears on back there? Silence filled the channel. Otis tried again. Dark Peterbilt, running westbound behind Big O. Come on back if you're listening. Still nothing. Even drivers who preferred solitude usually acknowledged a direct call on Channel 19. Otis decided to test his shadow. He activated his turn signal and moved into the left lane, as if preparing to pass slower traffic that wasn't there. In his mirror, he watched the Peterbilt immediately respond, matching his lane change perfectly. When Otis moved back to the right lane, the other truck followed with the same precision. A chill ran down Otis's spine. This wasn't coincidental convoy driving. This was deliberate stalking. He reached for his cell phone, but the screen showed no signal bars. Not unusual in remote Wyoming, but the timing felt ominous. His truck's satellite communication system was still functional, so he contacted his dispatcher. Midwest Transport Dispatch, this is Unit 47. Myrtle Kowalski's familiar voice crackled through the speaker. At 63, she'd been dispatching drivers for 12 years and had talked dozens of truckers through everything from mechanical breakdowns to family emergencies. Unit 47, this is Myrtle. Go ahead, Otis. Myrtle, I've got a situation. Another truck's been following me for 20 miles, real close, matching every move I make. Something doesn't feel right. Copy that, Otis. Can you get a visual on company markings or license plates? Otis strained to see details through the harsh glare of those unusual headlights. Negative on markings, dark Peterbilt, can't determine the exact color. Those lights are something else, though, brighter than anything I've seen on the road. Roger. What's your current location? Just past mile marker 365, heading westbound on I-80. Okay, you're in pretty isolated territory there. Next major exit is Laramie, about 30 miles ahead. Take that exit and see if your shadow follows. If he does, head straight for the truck stop and call local authorities. Copy, Myrtle. I'll keep you posted. As the miles rolled by, Otis found himself checking his mirrors every few seconds. The Peterbilt maintained its position with unwavering precision. No variation in distance, no attempt to pass, no response to CB calls, just those piercing lights constant as death itself. At mile marker 372, something changed. The following truck began flashing its high beams. Not the friendly acknowledgement that truckers used to greet each other, but a rapid, almost strobe-like pattern that reflected off Otis's mirrors and into his cab. The flashing continued for nearly a minute before stopping abruptly. Otis's hands tightened on the steering wheel. 15 years of professional driving had taught him to trust his instincts, and every instinct was screaming danger. He tried the CB again. "Any drivers monitoring Channel 19? This is Big O running westbound around the 372. I've got a truck following real close, acting strange. If anyone's in the area, I could use some company." A female voice responded immediately. "Big O, this is Wyoming Kate in a white Freightliner, eastbound toward you about 8 miles out. What kind of strange behavior?" "Kate, this Pete's been shadowing me for over 30 miles. Won't respond to CB, keeps flashing his brights in some kind of pattern. Starting to think this isn't just another driver having a bad night." "Copy that, Big O. I'll keep my eyes open when I pass you. Get that truck's description ready for the authorities if needed." As Wyoming. Kate's headlights appeared in the distance. Otis felt relief. Having another professional witness his situation would help if he needed to file a report. He positioned his truck to give Kate a clear view of the Peterbilt as she passed. But as Kate's Freightliner approached, something unexpected happened. The Peterbilt suddenly accelerated, pulling alongside Otis's trailer on the left. For the first time, he got a clear look at the pursuing vehicle. What he saw made his blood run cold. The Peterbilt was flat black, painted with non-reflective paint that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The cab had been extensively modified. The windshield was tinted so dark it was impossible to see inside, and additional lights had been mounted on the roof and bumper, far more than any legitimate truck would carry. Most disturbing were the license plates, which appeared to be hand-painted numbers deliberately obscured with mud. As Wyoming Kate passed in the eastbound lane, the black Peterbilt suddenly swerved toward Otis's truck, closing the gap to mere inches. Otis yanked his steering wheel to the right, feeling his trailer sway dangerously as he fought to maintain control. "Kate, did you see that? This maniac just tried to run me off the road." "I saw it, Big O. That's no standard truck configuration. I'm calling this in to State Patrol right now. You need to get off the highway immediately." The black Peterbilt had dropped back to its original position, those unnaturally bright lights once again boring into Otis's mirrors. But now there was something else. A low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the modified truck's exhaust system, like the growl of some mechanical predator. Wyoming. Kate's voice crackled over the CB. "State Patrol's been notified. There's a truck stop at the Laramie exit, about 12 miles ahead. Can you make it that far?" "I'm damn sure going to try." But as those words left his mouth, the black Peterbilt began moving again. This time, pulling into the left lane and slowly gaining. Through his side mirror, Otis could see more details of the modified truck. It rode higher than a standard Peterbilt, suggesting a lifted suspension. The exhaust stacks had been modified too, painted the same flat black as the rest of the vehicle. The Peterbilt pulled alongside Otis's cab, matching his speed exactly. For several terrifying seconds they ran side by side through the Wyoming night. Otis tried to see into the other truck's cab, but the tinted windows revealed nothing. Not even a silhouette was visible through that impenetrable darkness. Then, without warning, the black truck began edging closer. Inch by inch, it moved toward Otis's lane, forcing him toward the shoulder. Otis had two choices: be pushed off the road or fight back. He chose to fight. Otis downshifted and floored the accelerator. His Kenworth's engine responded with a surge of power, pulling ahead of the black Peterbilt by several truck lengths. In his mirrors, he watched those alien lights fall back, but he knew this was far from over. The black truck was accelerating now, closing the gap with alarming speed. Whatever modifications had been made to that Peterbilt gave it capabilities that no standard commercial vehicle should possess. Otis's speedometer climbed past 80 miles per hour, well above the posted limit, but he had no choice. The alternative was being run off the road by what was clearly not a legitimate commercial vehicle. His CB crackled with Myrtle's voice. "Unit 47, Wyoming State Patrol has units heading your way, but you're in a communication dead zone. Closest car is 20 minutes out." Myrtle, I don't think I've got 20 minutes. This guy's not giving up, and he's driving something that shouldn't be legal on any highway. Just keep moving, Otis. Don't let him box you in. The black Peterbilt was gaining again, and this time it wasn't trying to pull alongside. It was moving directly behind Otis, those lights growing larger in his mirrors. The distance closed to 2 truck lengths, then 1. Otis felt the first contact as a gentle bump against his rear bumper, then another, harder this time. The black truck was trying to force him into a jackknife by destabilizing his trailer. "Kate, you still monitoring?" "I'm here, Big O. State Patrol wants you to stay on the interstate. Don't take any exits where this lunatic could corner you." But as mile marker 385 flashed past, Otis realized he might not have a choice about staying on the interstate. The black Peterbilt was becoming more aggressive, tapping his trailer with increasing force. Each impact sent vibrations through his truck that he could feel in his bones. The speedometer now read 85 miles per hour, the maximum safe speed for his loaded truck. Any faster, and he risked losing control entirely. But the black truck showed no signs of struggling with the high speed, matching his pace effortlessly. Through the CB, Otis heard Wyoming Kate coordinating with State Patrol. "Suspect vehicle at mile marker 385, making contact with victim's trailer, attempting to cause an accident." A new voice crackled through. "All units, Wyoming State Patrol dispatch. We have a priority emergency on I-80 westbound. Any units in the Laramie vicinity respond immediately." But Otis knew help was still too far away. He was running out of options and running out of road. The next 12 miles to Laramie stretched ahead like an eternity, and the black truck behind him was growing bolder with each passing minute. As mile marker 390 approached, something strange happened. The harassment suddenly stopped. The black Peterbilt had fallen back to its original following distance, those lights once again maintaining their precise spacing. The change was so abrupt that it was almost more unsettling than the attacks had been. Otis's hands were shaking as he keyed his CB. "Kate, something's changed. He's backed off. Don't trust it, Big O. This could be a setup for something worse. Wyoming." Kate was right to be suspicious, as Otis crested a gentle hill and began the descent toward the Laramie Valley. He understood why his pursuer had backed off. Ahead in the distance, perhaps 4 miles away, he could see the glow of truck stop lights. Safety, witnesses, and what he hoped would be the end of his ordeal. But the black Peterbilt had other plans. The truck suddenly accelerated again, but this time it pulled into the left lane and moved far ahead of Otis, its taillights disappearing over the next hill. For a moment, Otis allowed himself to hope that his nightmare was over, that the mysterious driver had given up the pursuit. That hope died when he crested the hill and saw what waited for him in the valley below. The black Peterbilt was parked sideways across both lanes of the interstate, completely blocking the highway. Its lights were arranged in a pattern that created a wall of blinding illumination, making it impossible to see around the truck or judge exactly how it was positioned. Otis had perhaps 30 seconds before he would reach the roadblock. At his current speed, Stopping was impossible. Swerving off the highway at this speed would almost certainly result in a rollover that would kill him instantly. But there was a third option, one that would require every bit of skill he'd accumulated in 15 years of professional driving. The left shoulder was narrow but paved, originally designed for emergency vehicles. If Otis could thread his truck through the gap between the guardrail and the blocking Peterbilt, he might squeeze through. The margin for error would be measured in inches. Otis made his choice. He yanked the steering wheel hard left, feeling his trailer begin to sway as he moved onto the shoulder. The guardrail flashed past his driver's side window, close enough to touch. Ahead, the gap between the rail and the black truck looked impossibly narrow. His CB exploded with Kate's voice. "Big O, what are you doing?" "Only thing I can do," Otis replied through gritted teeth. The world slowed to crystalline clarity as Otis entered the gap. His side mirrors folded back from contact with both the guardrail and the black truck, but his Kenworth squeezed through like a bullet through a gun barrel. For 3 eternal seconds, metal scraped against metal as paint was ground away from both vehicles. Then he was through, his truck bouncing violently as he returned to the travel lanes. In his remaining mirror, he could see the black Peterbilt beginning to move, starting the pursuit all over again. But now, Otis could see the lights of the Laramie truck stop directly ahead. Safety was less than 2 miles away. All he had to do was reach it before the black truck could catch him again. As he raced toward the sanctuary, Otis caught a glimpse of something in his damaged side mirror that made his heart skip a beat. For just a moment, as the black truck repositioned itself to resume the chase, its headlights had illuminated the interior of the cab through the windshield. And in that brief instant, Otis could have sworn he saw a figure behind the wheel. Someone wearing what appeared to be a trucker's cap, hunched over the steering wheel with mechanical intensity. The black truck had a driver after all. Someone was behind that wheel. Someone who'd been hunting him with methodical precision across the Wyoming wilderness. The question that would haunt him for weeks to come was simple. Who was it? And why had they chosen him as their target? The race toward Laramie was far from over. The Laramie truck stop blazed like a beacon of civilization in the Wyoming wilderness. Fluorescent lights illuminated rows of 18-wheelers parked under the canopy, their drivers likely grabbing mandatory rest or a hot meal before continuing their journeys. Normal truckers living normal lives, unaware that a nightmare was racing toward them at 85 miles per hour. Otis's heart was still pounding from what he'd glimpsed in that brief moment when the headlights had illuminated the black truck's interior. The figure behind the wheel had been unmistakably human, someone wearing a trucker's cap, hunched over the steering wheel with predatory focus. This wasn't mechanical malfunction or road rage. This was deliberate, methodical hunting. "Kate, I'm coming up on the truck stop now. 1 mile out," Otis transmitted as he began his approach to the exit. "Wyoming." Kate's voice crackled through the CB with barely controlled tension. "Copy, Big O. I've got the night manager on my cell. They're calling every driver in the lot to their trucks, getting ready to block exits if this maniac follows you in." Behind him, the black Peterbilt had recovered from their encounter at the impromptu roadblock and was closing the distance once again. Those alien bright lights filled his mirrors, but now Otis knew there was someone behind them, someone who'd been studying his movements, learning his patterns, planning this hunt with terrifying precision. As Otis took the exit ramp, he expected the black truck to continue west on I-80, perhaps realizing that a truck stop full of witnesses would end any chance of completing whatever mission had brought them together on this desolate highway. Instead, the Peterbilt followed him down the ramp, maintaining the same mechanical distance it had held for the past 40 miles. "Kate, he's still following. He's taking the exit. That doesn't make sense. Why would he trap himself in a lot full of truckers?" Otis didn't have an answer, but the sick feeling in his stomach was growing stronger. As he followed the curves of the exit ramp down toward the truck stop complex, he caught clearer glimpses of the pursuing vehicle under the overhead lighting. The modifications were even more extensive than he'd initially realized. Additional antennas, what appeared to be reinforced bumpers, and equipment mounted on the roof that had no business on any commercial vehicle. The truck stop parking lot was laid out in the typical pattern: fuel islands near the entrance, the main building in the center, and parallel rows of parking spaces stretching toward the back of the property. During peak hours, maneuvering required patience and careful attention to avoid collisions with other vehicles. The Black Peterbilt ignored all normal traffic patterns. Instead of following the designated truck routes, it cut directly across painted lines and drove through areas meant for pedestrian access. Other drivers who'd been walking to or from the building scrambled for safety as the modified truck roared past them with complete disregard for their presence. "All drivers! All drivers!" a panicked voice called over CB Channel 19. "Black Pete running wild in the lot. Everyone, get to your trucks and secure your doors." Otis was still navigating the entrance when he realized where the black truck was heading. The main building sat at the center of the complex, a combination restaurant, convenience store, and driver services center. Large, plate glass windows faced the parking lot, and through them, Otis could see the normal late-night crowd. Truckers grabbing quick meals, cashiers working the graveyard shift, and a security guard who was now reaching frantically for his radio. The Black Peterbilt was aimed straight at those windows. "He's going to ram the building," Otis shouted into his CB. "Everyone, get out of the restaurant now." But there wasn't time for evacuation. The modified truck hit the plate glass frontage at approximately 40 miles per hour, its reinforced front end acting like a battering ram. The sound of shattering glass echoed across the parking lot, audible even over the rumble of diesel engines from dozens of trucks. Otis pulled to a stop near the fuel islands and immediately called 911 on his cell phone. 3 bars, enough to get through to emergency services. 911, what's your emergency? Truck stop at I-80 and US 287 in Laramie. A truck just crashed through the front of the building. Multiple injuries likely. Send everything you've got. Through the chaos erupting in the parking lot, Otis could see other drivers converging on the damaged building. These were professionals who'd seen plenty of accidents in their careers, and their training was taking over. They were rushing toward the danger, ready to help whoever might be trapped inside. But as the first driver reached the wreckage, something happened that defied all logic and experience. The Black Peterbilt backed out of the building under its own power. The entire front end should have been destroyed by the impact, but except for some cosmetic damage to the windshield and lighting arrays, the truck appeared fully functional. It reversed clear of the building debris, paused for a moment as if assessing the situation, then turned toward the drivers who were trying to help the injured, and accelerated directly at them. The truckers scattered, diving between parked vehicles as the black truck roared through the space where they'd been standing moments before. One driver, a heavy-set man in his 50s, wasn't fast enough. The truck's mirror caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him sprawling across the asphalt. Otis realized with horror that this wasn't an accident or loss of control. Someone was deliberately using an 18-wheeler as a weapon, trying to kill anyone who got in their way. His CB exploded with frantic voices. "Multiple injuries in the restaurant. That maniac's trying to run us down. Where the hell are the cops?" The last question was answered by the distant wail of sirens. Emergency vehicles were responding, but they were still several minutes away. In the meantime, the black truck had positioned itself near the lot's main exit, effectively trapping everyone inside the complex. Otis made a decision that went against every survival instinct he possessed. Instead of staying safely near the fuel islands, he started his engine and began driving toward the damaged building. If people were injured inside, they needed immediate medical attention, and his truck's first aid kit was more comprehensive than most. As he navigated between parked trailers, Otis kept the black Peterbilt in sight through his mirrors. It had spotted his movement and was beginning to turn in his direction. But this time, Otis had advantages he hadn't possessed on the open highway. He knew the layout of this truck stop from dozens of previous visits, and he was surrounded by stationary obstacles that could provide cover. The black truck was fast and maneuverable, but it was also larger than a standard Peterbilt due to its modifications. That extra size would work against it in the tight confines of the parking lot. Otis pulled his Kenworth as close to the damaged building as possible and jumped from the cab. Through the shattered windows, he could see the devastation inside. Tables and chairs were scattered like toys. Ceiling tiles had fallen, and at least 4 people were down on the floor. Some were moving, trying to crawl toward safety. Others lay motionless in pools of spreading blood. "Can anybody hear me?" Otis called as he climbed through the largest window opening. "I'm here to help." A young waitress with blood streaming from cuts on her face turned toward him. "There's people trapped under that beam," she gasped, pointing toward the far side of the restaurant where a section of the ceiling had collapsed. Otis could hear the rumble of the black truck's engine growing louder outside, but he forced himself to focus on the immediate crisis. 3 people were pinned under debris, 2 middle-aged truckers who'd probably been grabbing a late meal, and an elderly man who appeared to be a customer. "We need to get everyone out of here," Otis told the waitress. "That truck's coming back." As if summoned by his words, the sound of the diesel engine stopped directly outside the damaged storefront. Through the destroyed windows, Otis could see those characteristic lights positioning themselves for another assault. But this time, the truck wasn't moving. The engine was idling, and whoever was behind the wheel seemed to be waiting for something. Otis helped the waitress to her feet, then turned his attention to the trapped victims. The ceiling beam was too heavy for him to lift alone, but working together with 2 other customers who'd emerged from hiding, they managed to shift it enough for the injured people to be pulled free. One of the truckers had a severe leg injury and couldn't walk without support. The elderly customer was unconscious but breathing. The second trucker was conscious but disoriented, probably from a concussion. "There's a back exit," the waitress said, pointing toward the rear of the building. "Service entrance for deliveries." As they organized the evacuation, Otis became aware of new sounds outside. Multiple diesel engines starting up throughout the parking lot. The professional drivers who'd scattered when the black truck first attacked were regrouping, and from the coordinated CB chatter he could hear through his truck's radio, they were planning a response. "All right, drivers, listen up," a gruff voice was broadcasting on Channel 19. "We got injured people in that building, and this maniac's not going to let the EMTs through. Time to show him what happens when truckers stick together. Wyoming Kate here. I'm positioning north of the building. Big Jake's got the south side covered. Hammer down coming in from the east." It was an impromptu convoy operation, the kind of coordinated effort that truckers had been performing for decades to help stranded motorists or clear accident scenes. But this time, they were boxing in one of their own, or someone who was pretending to be one of their own. The black Peterbilt seemed to sense the changing tactical situation. Its engine sound shifted from idle to acceleration, and through the windows Otis could see it beginning to move erratically around the lot, testing the positions of the converging trucks. But each time it tried to approach the building, another 18-wheeler would move to block its path. Using the distraction provided by his fellow drivers, Otis coordinated the evacuation through the rear exit. With help from other customers and the waitress, they carried the unconscious man and supported the walking wounded to safety behind the building, where they were out of sight from the rampaging truck. As ambulances finally arrived and paramedics took over care of the injured, Otis found himself standing with a group of drivers who'd witnessed the entire attack. the questions they were asking matched the ones running through his own mind. What kind of psychopath uses a truck as a weapon? Did anyone get a look at the driver? How do we stop something like this? That last question was answered when Wyoming Kate's voice crackled over the CB. He's making a run for the fuel pumps. Otis looked up to see the black Peterbilt accelerating toward the truck stop's fuel islands. If it hit those pumps at high speed, the resulting explosion would turn the entire complex into an inferno. Thousands of gallons of diesel fuel, dozens of vehicles, and all the people who'd come to help, everything would be consumed in a fireball visible for miles. But Wyoming Kate was already moving. Her white Freightliner positioned itself between the black truck and the fuel pumps, creating a barrier that couldn't be bypassed or intimidated. The collision, when it came, was like the sound of the world ending. Two 18-wheelers meeting head-on at a combined speed of nearly 60 miles per hour. Kate's truck absorbed the impact and held its position, the trailer jackknifing but maintaining the barrier between the attacker and the fuel systems. The black Peterbilt's front end crumpled against the Freightliner's reinforced bumper, finally bringing the nightmare machine to a stop in a cloud of steam and smoke. As emergency responders flooded the scene and Wyoming Kate climbed down from her damaged cab, injured but alive, police officers approached the black truck with weapons drawn. What they found would puzzle investigators for weeks to come. The driver's door was ajar, and there was no one in the cab. But on the passenger seat, officers discovered a CB radio that was still transmitting. The voice coming through the speaker was calm, almost conversational. Phase 1 complete. Operational data collected. Phase 2 will commence at designated coordinates. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only static. A more thorough search of the truck revealed sophisticated remote control equipment, cameras, servos, and electronic systems that could operate every function of the vehicle from a distance. But unlike a fully automated system, this setup required human input. Someone had been controlling the truck, but not from inside the cab. As investigators processed the scene and medical crews transported the injured to hospitals, Otis stood beside his truck and tried to make sense of what he'd witnessed. The black Peterbilt sat motionless now, diminished by the damage it had sustained, but still representing something terrifying, the future of highway violence, where killers could strike while remaining safely hidden miles away. "Hell of a night," Wyoming Kate said, approaching him with her left arm in a sling but otherwise uninjured. "Hell of a night," Otis agreed. "What you did back there, you saved everyone." Kate shrugged with her good shoulder. "We look out for each other out here, always have, always will." But as they stood talking, neither of them noticed the small drone hovering silently in the darkness beyond the truck stop's lights. Its camera was focused on their conversation, transmitting every word to someone who was very much alive and already planning the next phase of his campaign. As the drone disappeared into the night, the CB radio in the abandoned black truck crackled once more with that same calm voice. "Target acquisition confirmed. Primary subject survived engagement. Recommend escalation to direct contact protocols." Then silence. The nightmare at Laramie was over. But somewhere in the darkness, the real Lester Crenshaw was studying the footage from his attack, learning from his mistakes, and preparing for a more personal approach to eliminating the drivers who'd dared to interfere with his mission. The war against America's truckers was just beginning, and now it had a face, even if no one knew it yet. 3 weeks after the Laramie truck stop incident, Otis Bramble sat in a sterile conference room at the Wyoming State Patrol headquarters in Cheyenne. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across a table covered with photographs, technical reports, and audio transcripts from that terrible night. Most disturbing were the enhanced recordings from the CB transmissions, the calm, methodical voice that had coordinated the attack from somewhere beyond the chaos. The lead investigator, a seasoned state trooper with 20 years of experience, consulted her notes while a federal specialist examined data recovered from the black Peterbilt's onboard computers. The truck itself sat in a secure impound facility, its remote control equipment dissected by teams of technicians. "Mr. Bramble," the trooper said, "we've made significant progress in identifying the person behind the attack. The voice analysis from the CB transmissions, combined with the truck's registration history, has led us to a suspect." She slid a file across the table. Inside was a driver's license photo of a man in his mid-40s with graying hair and the weathered face of a longtime trucker. The eyes held an intensity that made Otis uncomfortable even in a photograph. The name on the license read Lester Crenshaw. Lester Crenshaw, age 44, 23 years commercial driving experience, the trooper continued. Clean record until about 2 years ago, when he started having serious problems with dispatchers, missed deliveries, and multiple complaints from other drivers about aggressive behavior. Otis studied the photograph, trying to connect this ordinary-looking man with the sophisticated attack he'd survived. What kind of problems? Road rage incidents escalated over time, following trucks too closely, using CB radio to harass other drivers, deliberately blocking traffic. His last employer, Mountain West Freight, terminated him 18 months ago after he made specific threats against a dispatcher who refused to give him preferred routes. The federal specialist looked up from his laptop. The interesting aspect is that Crenshaw seemed to have developed an obsession with trucking technology, GPS systems, communication protocols, vehicle modification. He spent considerable time on industry forums, asking detailed questions about automated systems and remote vehicle operation. You're saying he planned this for over a year? We're saying he's been systematically studying the industry's vulnerabilities. The remote control technology wasn't random. It was specifically designed to exploit how professional drivers respond to crisis situations. Otis felt a chill as the scope of Crenshaw's preparation became clear. This wasn't spontaneous violence. It was methodical warfare conducted by someone who understood trucking operations intimately enough to turn that knowledge into a weapon. Where is he now? That's our immediate problem, the trooper admitted. We've been monitoring his known associates and financial records. Lester Crenshaw hasn't used credit cards, made phone calls, or contacted family members since the night before your encounter. He's completely off the grid. The federal specialist turned his screen toward Otis. But we have been monitoring CB frequencies and industry communication networks. Someone matching Crenshaw's voice patterns has been intercepting driver conversations, gathering intelligence on routes and schedules. We believe he's preparing for another operation. Before anyone could continue, Otis's cell phone buzzed with an urgent text from Myrtle. "Emergency situation. Call immediately." Otis stepped into the hallway to take the call. Myrtle's voice was tense with barely controlled panic. "Otis, we have a serious problem. 3-truck convoy attacked on I-70 near Grand Junction, Colorado. 1 driver killed, 1 in critical condition, 1 missing." "Missing how?" "Tommy Haugen, 41 years old, 15-year veteran. His truck was found abandoned about 5 miles from the attack site. No sign of struggle, no blood, but his CB radio was still transmitting. Someone was using it to broadcast on trucker frequencies." Otis felt his blood run cold. "What kind of broadcasts?" "Asking about your location, your current route, whether you were traveling alone. Whoever has Tommy is using him to gather information about you specifically." The implications hit Otis like a physical blow. Crenshaw wasn't just hunting random drivers anymore, he was specifically targeting people connected to the Laramie incident, and he was using kidnapped truckers as both bait and intelligence sources. "Myrtle, I need you to run something for me. Check our employment applications from about 3 years ago. Look for the name Lester Crenshaw." He could hear rapid typing as Myrtle accessed the company database. "Got him. Application submitted 3 years and 2 months ago. We rejected him after the background check showed multiple employer complaints and anger management issues. Do you remember anything specific about him?" "Actually, yes. He insisted on an in-person interview, which was unusual. Spent most of the time asking detailed questions about our dispatch procedures, how we track trucks, monitor driver communications, coordinate emergency responses. I thought he was being thorough, but now it sounds like he was conducting reconnaissance. Myrtle, the Colorado attack. Any witnesses see who took Tommy?" Security footage from a nearby rest stop shows him being approached by someone in a Colorado State Patrol uniform. The officer convinced Tommy to leave his truck and get into what looked like an unmarked patrol car. Fake cop? That's what the real authorities think. But here's the disturbing part. The person knew enough about proper procedures to convince an experienced driver to comply. Tommy's not the kind of guy who'd fall for an obvious scam. Otis felt the pieces falling into place. Crenshaw had spent months, possibly years, studying not just trucking operations but law enforcement procedures as well. He was using that knowledge to separate drivers from their vehicles and support networks. "I need to get to Colorado," Otis said. "Absolutely not. The federal agent specifically said, 'Myrtle, Crenshaw is using Tommy as bait to draw me into a trap. If I don't show up, he'll start killing more drivers to get my attention. But if I do show up on his terms, maybe I can figure out a way to stop him.'" There was a long pause before Myrtle spoke again. "What do you need from me?" "Coordinate with the investigators here. Make sure they know I'm going to Colorado as a consultant to help identify Crenshaw's methods. And Myrtle, if something happens to me out there, make sure everyone knows it was Lester Crenshaw who's responsible." 2 hours later, Otis was behind the wheel of his Kenworth, heading south toward Colorado with a convoy of unmarked federal vehicles maintaining distant surveillance. His truck had been equipped with additional tracking devices and emergency communication systems, but he knew that if Crenshaw was as knowledgeable about technology as the evidence suggested, those safeguards might be inadequate. As the Wyoming landscape rolled past his windows, Otis found himself remembering conversations with other drivers about the changing nature of their profession. Automation, GPS tracking, electronic logging devices. The industry was becoming increasingly monitored and controlled. For someone like Crenshaw, who'd been forced out of trucking, that technology represented both a threat and an opportunity. The CB radio crackled with routine chatter from drivers sharing information about road conditions and traffic. But Otis found himself listening for something else. The calm, educated voice that had coordinated the Laramie attack from the shadows. At the Colorado Welcome Center, Otis was briefed by a Colorado State Patrol sergeant on the Grand Junction attack. The pattern was becoming clearer. Crenshaw would use fake authority figures to separate drivers from their trucks, then use those isolated drivers as sources of information and leverage. "The missing driver, Tommy Haugen," the sergeant explained. "We think he's being held somewhere in the area. Crenshaw's been using his CB radio to broadcast on Channel 19, claiming he has information about planned attacks on other truckers." "What kind of information?" "Details about future targets, locations where he's planning to strike next. Classic hostage negotiation tactics, except he's not interested in negotiating. He's trying to draw specific people into his web." As they spoke, Otis's CB radio crackled with an incoming transmission on Channel 19. The voice was human this time, the same calm, educated tone from the Laramie recordings, but now speaking directly to him. "Unit 47, Otis Bramble, Midwest Transport. I know you're listening." Otis felt his blood freeze. After 3 weeks of wondering about the identity of his stalker, he was finally hearing Lester Crenshaw's voice in real time. "I'm listening," Otis replied, keying his microphone. "Excellent. I have something that belongs to the trucking community, a driver named Tommy Haugen. He's alive and relatively comfortable, but his continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation." "What do you want, Crenshaw?" There was a pause, as if the use of his name had surprised the man on the other end of the transmission. Then a low chuckle came through the speaker. "So, the investigators have been doing their homework. Good. That will make this conversation more efficient. What I want, Mr. Bramble, is recognition of a simple truth. Human drivers are obsolete, dangerous, inefficient. The industry would function better without you. And you've appointed yourself to prove that point? I've appointed myself to accelerate the inevitable. Every successful attack demonstrates the vulnerability of biological operators. Every eliminated driver creates an opportunity for automated replacement." The transmission continued with specific coordinates, a location approximately 30 miles northeast of Grand Junction, in an area of abandoned mining operations where cell phone coverage was minimal and law enforcement response would be delayed. "Come alone, Unit 47. Any federal escorts, any backup units, any deviation from my instructions, and Mr. Haugen dies. You have 90 minutes to reach the designated coordinates." "How do I know Tommy's still alive?" The CB crackled again, and this time it was a different voice, strained and frightened, but unmistakably that of another professional driver. "Otis, this is Tommy Haugen. Don't trust this guy. He's got some kind of mobile setup, real sophisticated. He's been monitoring CB traffic for weeks, learning about drivers, planning attacks." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by Crenshaw's calm voice. Mr. Haugen was providing more information than necessary. "As you can hear, he's alive and unharmed. Whether he remains that way depends on your prompt compliance with my instructions." The radio went silent. Otis looked at the state patrol sergeant, who was already coordinating with federal teams positioned throughout the region. They had helicopter support, tactical units, and sophisticated surveillance equipment. But all of that was useless if it meant Tommy Haugen would die. "I'm going," Otis said. "This is exactly what he wants. You're walking into a trap designed specifically for you. I know, but if I don't show up, he'll kill Tommy and move on to the next driver. How many more people have to die before we stop him?" As Otis climbed back into his truck and started the engine, he realized that his journey to Colorado wasn't just about rescuing a kidnapped driver. It was about confronting the darkest evolution of highway violence, someone who'd turned intimate knowledge of the trucking profession into a weapon against everyone who still had the privilege of driving for a living. Lester Crenshaw was waiting for him in the mountains, and this time there would be no anonymous black truck to hide behind. This would be personal, direct, and final. The real confrontation was about to begin. The abandoned mining road wound through Colorado's high desert like a scar across the landscape, each mile taking Otis Bramble further from civilization and deeper into Lester Crenshaw's carefully prepared killing ground. The coordinates had led him to an area where old copper mines had been carved into the mountainsides decades ago, leaving behind a maze of access roads, equipment yards, and abandoned structures that provided perfect cover for someone who wanted to remain hidden. Otis's dashboard clock showed 4:43 p.m. as he approached the designated meeting point, a wide clearing beside an old processing facility that had been shut down since the 1980s. Rusted equipment and concrete foundations were scattered across the area like the bones of some industrial graveyard, and the silence was so complete it seemed to press against his eardrums. A single truck was parked in the center of the clearing, not the destroyed black Peterbilt from Laramie, but a newer white Freightliner Cascadia with no company markings. It looked like 1,000 other trucks on American highways, which was undoubtedly intentional. But even from a distance, Otis could see that it had been modified. Additional antennas, equipment mounted on the chassis, and what appeared to be reinforced panels along the sides. Otis pulled his Kenworth to a stop about 50 yards away and shut down the engine. The silence that followed was absolute. No traffic noise, no human activity, just the occasional whisper of wind through the abandoned structures. His CB radio crackled to life immediately. Unit 47, welcome to the demonstration site. Exit your vehicle and approach on foot. Keep your hands visible at all times. Otis keyed his microphone. I'm here, Crenshaw. Where's Tommy? Mr. Haugen is secure and unharmed for the moment. His continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation with my final experiment. Experiment? A live demonstration of human driver obsolescence. Your participation will be broadcast to industry forums and trucking websites, showing the entire profession what happens when biological operators encounter superior systems. Otis climbed down from his cab, leaving the CB channel open so the distant federal surveillance teams could monitor the conversation. As he walked across the clearing, he studied the white Freightliner for any sign of movement or additional threats. The truck's cab appeared empty, but the modifications were now clearly visible. Mechanical arms had been mounted on the chassis, modified cargo handling equipment that could presumably grab and restrain a human target. Additional cameras were positioned at multiple angles, creating a complete surveillance network around the vehicle. That's far enough, Crenshaw's voice called from speakers mounted on the Freightliner. Turn around slowly, so I can verify you're not carrying weapons or recording devices. Otis complied, rotating in place with his arms extended. As he completed the turn, he caught sight of movement behind one of the abandoned structures. Someone was emerging from concealment. Lester Crenshaw looked exactly like his driver's license photo, but 20 pounds thinner and with the haunted intensity of a man who'd been living on the margins of society for months. He wore faded coveralls and carried what appeared to be a sophisticated control tablet connected to a radio transmitter. Hello, Unit 47. I've been looking forward to this meeting since our encounter on I-80. Where's Tommy? Crenshaw gestured toward the white Freightliner. Safe and secure in the modified sleeper compartment. He's been quite informative about current industry practices during our time together. Did you know that the average driver checks in with dispatch every 4 hours? Very predictable behavior patterns. You're sick. I'm efficient. Do you have any idea how many drivers I could have eliminated if the federal investigation hadn't forced me to change tactics? Dozens, possibly hundreds, all in service of demonstrating the inevitable superiority of automated systems. As Crenshaw spoke, Otis noticed additional details about their surroundings. Multiple tire tracks in the dirt suggested this location had been used repeatedly. Solar panels and generator equipment indicated a semi-permanent installation. This wasn't just a meeting point. It was Crenshaw's operational headquarters. The trucking industry rejected me, Crenshaw continued, his voice taking on the tone of a rehearsed speech. But that rejection was actually liberation. Free from the constraints of employment and regulations, I could pursue pure efficiency, eliminate the human variables that make freight transport unreliable and dangerous. You mean murder innocent people? I mean optimize resource allocation. Every human driver eliminated creates a space for automated replacement. Every successful demonstration proves the vulnerability of biological operators. Crenshaw glanced at his control tablet, and its screen lit up with what appeared to be multiple video feeds. Excellent. My surveillance network confirms that your federal escorts have lost visual contact. We're now completely isolated for the demonstration. Otis felt his pulse quicken. The backup teams were supposed to maintain distant observation using drone surveillance and satellite tracking. If Crenshaw had found a way to neutralize those systems, he was truly on his own. What happens now? Now you participate in my final proof of concept, a live-streamed event showing the entire trucking industry what happens when human drivers encounter optimized elimination protocols. Crenshaw activated a control on his tablet, and the white Freightliner's engine started remotely. The truck began moving without anyone in the cab, positioning itself between Otis and his Kenworth. The mechanical arms extended from the chassis, revealing sophisticated servo motors and hydraulic systems. 23 years I drove professionally, Crenshaw said, his voice growing more animated. 23 years of being treated like cargo instead of people. Dispatchers who didn't care if we made it home alive. Companies that replaced experienced drivers with GPS systems and electronic monitoring. The writing was on the wall, Mr. Bramble. I simply chose to accelerate the timeline. So you decided to eliminate us first. I decided to prove that human drivers are liabilities that the industry can no longer afford to tolerate. Your death will be broadcast live to trucking forums, showing how easily biological operators can be dominated by superior technology. The white Freightliner was maneuvering now, its mechanical arms sweeping the air as it tested their range and flexibility. The vehicle moved with unnatural precision, every action calculated and deliberate. The demonstration is simple, Crenshaw explained. You attempt to escape. The automated system pursues and captures you. The entire sequence is recorded and distributed, showing the trucking world that human reflexes and experience are meaningless against properly designed systems. And then? Then you join Mr. Haugen in permanent storage while I move to Phase 3 of my operation. Larger targets, more visible demonstrations, until the industry finally accepts that biological drivers are obsolete. Otis looked around the clearing, calculating distances and potential cover. The abandoned mining equipment offered some concealment, but the Freightliner's mobility and mechanical arms would eventually overcome any temporary advantage. His only real option was to reach his own truck and try to outmaneuver the remote-controlled pursuer. "One problem with your plan, Lester," Otis said, backing slowly toward his Kenworth. "You're assuming I'm going to play by your rules. You have no choice. The demonstration begins now." Crenshaw activated another control, and the Freightliner accelerated toward Otis with startling speed. But instead of running, Otis dove behind a concrete foundation and pulled out the emergency flare he'd taken from his truck's safety kit. The Freightliner's sensors detected the sudden change in his position and adjusted course accordingly. As the truck approached his hiding place, Otis lit the flare and threw it directly at the vehicle's primary camera array. The brilliant red flame exploded against the equipment cluster, temporarily blinding the optical sensors and causing the automated system to break suddenly. But the respite was brief. Backup cameras and radar units quickly compensated for the damaged sensors. Otis sprinted toward his Kenworth, hearing the Freightliner's engine roar as it resumed pursuit. He reached his truck's cab just as one of the mechanical arms swept through the space where he'd been standing moments before. Starting his engine, Otis threw the transmission into gear and accelerated out of the clearing. In his mirrors, he could see the white Freightliner following with mechanical precision, its movements calculated and relentless. But Otis had advantages the automated system couldn't replicate. 15 years of professional driving had taught him how to read terrain, anticipate mechanical limitations, and push equipment beyond normal operational parameters. He guided his Kenworth down a steep access road that led to the lower mining levels, using gravity to increase his speed while forcing the pursuing truck to navigate increasingly treacherous conditions. The Freightliner's programming kept it functional, but it lacked the intuitive judgment that allowed human drivers to take calculated risks. At the bottom of the mining complex, Otis found what he was looking for: a narrow passage between two concrete structures that was just wide enough for a single truck. If he could force the Freightliner to follow him through the gap, Its additional equipment might make it too wide to pass. The gamble worked. As Otis's Kenworth squeezed through the opening, the pursuing freightliner attempted to follow, but became wedged between the concrete walls. Its mechanical arms scraped against the structures, creating showers of sparks as servo motors strained against immovable obstacles. Otis stopped his truck and climbed down to assess the situation. The freightliner was trapped, its system still operational but unable to move forward or backward. Through the tinted windows of the sleeper compartment, he could see Tommy Haugen, restrained but apparently unharmed. "Impressive problem-solving, Unit 47, Crenshaw's voice crackled from the truck's external speakers. But ultimately futile. The real demonstration was never about the vehicle. Otis turned to see Crenshaw approaching on foot, carrying what appeared to be a modified cattle prod connected to his control device. The man's mechanical composure had cracked, revealing the desperate fury underneath. The real demonstration is this. Human drivers, no matter how experienced or clever, are ultimately vulnerable to systematic elimination. Your skills, your instincts, your 15 years of experience, all worthless against determined opposition. You're wrong, Lester. You can program machines to move freight, but you can't program the reason drivers do this job. It's not just about point A to point B. It's about freedom, independence, the brotherhood of people who keep America running. Romantic nonsense, inefficient emotional attachments that have no place in optimized logistics. Crenshaw raised the modified cattle prod, but before he could activate it, the sound of helicopters filled the air. Federal tactical teams were rappelling from aircraft that had approached from multiple directions, surrounding the mining complex. "Impossible," Crenshaw snarled, his technological confidence finally cracking. "I disabled all their surveillance systems." "You disabled the decoys," Otis replied. "The real tracking was built into my truck's engine control module. Military-grade GPS that can't be jammed or interfered with. Those federal agents have been watching this whole time." As armed agents closed in from all directions, Crenshaw made one final desperate attempt to complete his demonstration. He lunged at Otis with the cattle prod, but 15 years of loading and unloading heavy cargo had given the trucker reflexes and strength that the emaciated ex-driver couldn't match. Otis caught Crenshaw's wrist, twisted the weapon away, and drove his fist into the man's solar plexus with enough force to drop him to his knees. By the time federal agents reached them, Lester Crenshaw was restrained, and his war against professional drivers was finally over. The rescue of Tommy Haugen revealed the full scope of Crenshaw's operation. The abandoned mining complex contained workshop facilities where he'd been converting stolen vehicles into remote-controlled weapons, computer servers with detailed profiles of dozens of professional drivers, and plans for attacks on major truck stops and distribution centers across multiple states. He was planning to eliminate the entire transportation infrastructure. The lead federal agent explained to Otis as they processed the scene. Not just individual drivers, but the economic foundation that supports commercial freight movement. What happens to him now? Multiple federal charges across 7 jurisdictions. Terrorism, kidnapping, murder, conspiracy. He'll never see the outside of a prison again. As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, Otis stood beside his truck and watched investigators catalog the evidence of Crenshaw's systematic campaign. Tommy Haugen had been airlifted to a hospital but was expected to make a full recovery. The immediate threat was over, but the questions raised by Lester Crenshaw's operation would linger for years. Myrtle's voice crackled through Otis's CB radio as he prepared to leave the mining complex. "Unit 47, this is dispatch. What's your status?" "Heading home, Myrtle. Mission accomplished." "Roger that. You've got a full load waiting in Denver when you're ready to get back to work." "And Otis?" "Yeah? Every driver on our roster knows what you did out there. The whole industry owes you one." Otis smiled as he started his engine. After everything he'd been through, The prospect of a routine freight haul sounded like paradise. No stalkers, no remote-controlled trucks, no deranged ex-drivers seeking revenge against the profession that had rejected them. Just the open road, a load to deliver, and the steady rhythm of 18 wheels carrying America's commerce across the endless highways. As he drove away from the mining complex, Otis caught a final glimpse of Lester Crenshaw being loaded into a federal transport vehicle. The man who'd tried to prove human drivers obsolete looked small and broken, defeated by the very human qualities he'd tried to eliminate: courage, loyalty, and the willingness to risk everything for a fellow driver in trouble. The Shadow Truckers' war was over, but his legacy would serve as a reminder to every professional driver who heard the story. The greatest threats to their profession might not come from automation or regulation, but from those who'd lost their place in the brotherhood of the road and sought to destroy what they could no longer be part of. But as long as there were drivers like Otis Bramble willing to face those threats, the highways would remain in human hands. The New Mexico desert stretched endlessly in all directions as Clifford Hayes guided his Peterbilt 379 down U.S. Highway 285, the September sun beating mercilessly on the asphalt ahead. The 42-year-old veteran trucker had been hauling freight for Continental Logistics for 8 years, and this run from El Paso to Denver was routine cargo, consumer electronics that would stock big-box stores throughout Colorado for the fall shopping season. What made this particular haul valuable wasn't just the electronics themselves, but their concentration in a single trailer. 48 feet of smartphones, tablets, gaming systems, and laptops worth nearly $2 million wholesale. It was the kind of cargo that required extra security protocols, but Continental's insurance company had calculated the risk as minimal on this particular route during daylight hours. Clifford's dashboard clock showed 2:47 p.m. as he approached the desolate stretch between Artesia and Roswell. This was empty country, rolling desert punctuated by the occasional oil derrick or cattle ranch, with civilization measured in the distance between gas stations rather than city blocks. Cell phone coverage was spotty at best, and the CB radio was often the only reliable communication with the outside world. At mile marker 127, Clifford noticed something unusual in his mirrors. A white panel van had been following him for the past 10 miles, maintaining a consistent distance of about 8 car lengths. Not particularly alarming on its own. Plenty of vehicles traveled this route at similar speeds, but something about the van's positioning struck him as deliberate. Breaker 19, this is big country running northbound on 285, Clifford transmitted on his CB. Any drivers got their ears on around the 127 marker? A gravelly voice responded immediately. Big country. This is Desert Rose running southbound about 15 miles ahead of you. Road's clear, but watch for construction around the 145. They got flaggers slowing traffic to 1 lane. Copy that, Desert Rose. Much obliged. Clifford glanced in his mirrors again. The white van was still there, still maintaining its precise distance. He decided to conduct a simple test, gradually reducing his speed from 70 to 65 miles per hour. The van slowed accordingly, never closing the gap or attempting to pass. A chill ran down Clifford's spine despite the desert heat. 15 years of professional driving had taught him to trust his instincts, and those instincts were now suggesting he was being hunted. He reached for his cell phone to call his dispatcher, but the screen showed no signal bars. Not unusual in this remote stretch of New Mexico, but the timing felt ominous. His truck's satellite communication system was still functional, so he attempted to contact Continental Logistics. Continental Dispatch, this is Unit 23 calling in. The familiar voice of Beulah Morrison, the afternoon dispatcher, crackled through the speaker. At 58, she'd been coordinating drivers for Continental for over a decade and had guided dozens of truckers through everything from mechanical breakdowns to severe weather emergencies. Unit 23, this is Beulah. Go ahead, Clifford. Beulah, I've got a situation developing. White panel van's been following me for about 15 miles, maintaining exact distance regardless of my speed changes. Something doesn't feel right about it. Copy that, Clifford. Can you get a visual on license plates or any identifying markings? Clifford adjusted his mirrors, trying to see details through the heat shimmer rising from the asphalt. Negative on plates. Too much glare and distance. Van appears to be newer model, no company markings visible. Tinted windows make it impossible to see the driver. Roger. What's your current location? Northbound on 285, just past mile marker 127. Next significant town is Roswell, about 90 miles ahead. Okay, you're in pretty isolated territory there. I'm going to contact State Patrol and have them run some extra patrols in your area. In the meantime, keep your speed steady and don't take any unscheduled stops. Copy, Beulah. I'll keep you posted. As the miles rolled by, Clifford found himself checking his mirrors every few seconds. The van maintained its position with unwavering consistency. No variation in distance, no attempt to pass, no response when he activated his turn signals to test its reactions. Just that white presence in his mirrors, constant as a shadow. At mile marker 135, something changed. A second vehicle appeared in his mirrors, a dark pickup truck that had emerged from a side road and fallen in behind the van. The two vehicles began moving in obvious coordination, the pickup maintaining distance behind the van, just as the van maintained distance behind Clifford's trailer. Clifford's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He was no longer dealing with a single suspicious vehicle. This was a coordinated operation involving multiple vehicles and multiple people. He tried his CB radio again. Any drivers monitoring Channel 19? This is Big Country running northbound on 285 around the 135. I've got two vehicles following in formation. If anyone's in the area, I could use some company. Silence filled the channel. Clifford tried different frequencies. Channels 17 and 21, which were sometimes used by truckers in remote areas, but received no response. Either there were no other commercial vehicles in range, or something was interfering with his transmissions. As he crested a gentle rise and began the descent into a long valley, Clifford saw why his CB calls weren't being answered. The landscape ahead was completely empty. No other trucks, no passenger cars, no sign of human activity except for the two vehicles stalking him. Someone had chosen this isolated stretch of highway very carefully. The pickup truck was accelerating now, pulling alongside the van. Through his side mirror, Clifford could see both vehicles clearly for the first time. The van was a late model Ford Transit, and the pickup appeared to be a Chevrolet Silverado with oversized tires and a lift kit. Both vehicles had tinted windows that made it impossible to see the occupants. At mile marker 138, the pickup truck moved into the left lane and began gaining on Clifford's position. This was the moment he'd been dreading, the transition from surveillance to direct action. Whatever these people wanted, they were about to make their move. Clifford reached for his satellite communication system again. Continental Dispatch, this is Unit 23. Emergency situation developing. Beulah's voice came through immediately, tense with concern. Unit 23, go ahead. Two vehicles now in active pursuit, white van and dark pickup. They're moving to intercept me. I need immediate law enforcement assistance at my location. Copy that, Clifford. State Patrol is being notified. Closest unit is approximately 45 minutes from your position. Can you maintain speed and avoid being stopped? I'm going to try. But as the pickup truck pulled alongside his cab, Clifford realized that avoiding confrontation might not be possible. The truck's passenger window rolled down, revealing a man in his 30s wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap. He was gesturing for Clifford to pull over. Clifford shook his head and pointed ahead, indicating he intended to continue driving. The man in the pickup became more animated, pointing toward the shoulder and making increasingly urgent gestures. When Clifford continued to refuse, the man reached into the cab and produced what appeared to be a badge or official identification. For a moment, Clifford hesitated. If these were legitimate law enforcement officers, ignoring their instructions could result in serious legal consequences. But something about the situation felt wrong. Real cops would have used marked vehicles and proper emergency lights to initiate a traffic stop. The pickup truck moved closer to Clifford's cab, close enough that he could see the man was speaking into a radio or cell phone. Behind them, the white van had accelerated and was now directly behind Clifford's trailer, boxing him in between the two vehicles. Clifford made his decision. Whatever these people wanted, he wasn't going to make it easy for them. He downshifted and pressed the accelerator, his Peterbilt's Caterpillar engine responding with a surge of power that pulled him ahead of the pickup truck. In his mirrors, he watched both pursuing vehicles accelerate to match his speed. The chase was on. The speedometer climbed past 75 miles per hour as Clifford pushed his loaded truck to its safe limits. The pickup had no trouble keeping pace, but the van was beginning to struggle with the high-speed pursuit. This gave Clifford hope. If he could maintain this pace long enough, he might outdistance at least one of his pursuers. His CB radio crackled with an unexpected transmission on Channel 19. "Big Country, this is the unit in the white van. You need to pull over immediately for a safety inspection." Clifford keyed his microphone. "Identify yourself. What agency are you with?" "Department of Transportation Safety Enforcement. Your vehicle has been flagged for immediate inspection due to equipment violations." "Bullshit. DOT doesn't use unmarked vans for safety stops. Who are you really?" There was a pause before a different voice came through the CCB, younger, with less authority than the first speaker. "Look, driver, we just want to inspect your cargo. Nobody has to get hurt here." The admission sent ice through Clifford's veins. These weren't law enforcement officers. They were cargo thieves using fake authority to stop trucks on isolated highways. The $2 million worth of electronics in his trailer had made him a target. "Beulah, you monitoring this?" Clifford transmitted on his satellite system. "Copy, Clifford. We're recording everything. State Patrol is aware you're dealing with cargo thieves. ETA for backup is now 35 minutes. 35 minutes. At his current speed, that represented nearly 50 miles of highway. Clifford had to maintain this pace and avoid being forced off the road for almost an hour while being pursued by people who were apparently willing to use violence to steal his cargo. The pickup truck was moving closer again, this time approaching from the right side. The passenger was no longer gesturing for Clifford to stop. He was pointing something at the truck's front tire. Clifford caught a glimpse of metal and realized the man was holding some kind of spike strip or tire deflation device. If they managed to puncture his tires at 75 miles per hour, the resulting blowout would almost certainly cause a catastrophic accident. Clifford would be killed, and the thieves would be free to loot his cargo from the wreckage. He yanked his steering wheel to the left, moving into the oncoming traffic lane to avoid the tire puncture device. The pickup truck tried to follow, but Clifford had timed his move perfectly. A southbound car appeared over the hill ahead, forcing the pickup to fall back to avoid a head-on collision. The white van was still behind him, but at a greater distance now. The high-speed chase was taking its toll on the smaller vehicle, and Clifford could see smoke beginning to rise from its engine compartment. For the first time since this nightmare began, Clifford allowed himself to hope that he might escape. His truck was holding together well at high speed. His fuel tanks were 3/4 full, and one of his pursuers was already experiencing mechanical problems. but his optimism was premature. As he crested another hill, Clifford saw what was waiting for him in the valley ahead. A third vehicle, another pickup truck, was parked sideways across both lanes of the highway, completely blocking the road. The thieves had anticipated his route and positioned a roadblock to stop him. At his current speed, Clifford had perhaps 30 seconds before impact. Stopping was impossible, and there was no shoulder wide enough to accommodate his truck. To the left was a steep embankment that would send his truck rolling. To the right was a drop-off into a deep arroyo that would be instantly fatal. But there was one option: a dirt access road that led to an oil pumping station about a quarter-mile off the highway. If Clifford could reach that road and navigate the rough terrain, he might be able to circle around the roadblock and return to the highway beyond the blocking vehicle. It was a desperate gamble that would require every bit of skill he'd accumulated in 15 years of professional driving. Clifford downshifted rapidly and yanked his steering wheel hard right, feeling his trailer begin to sway as he left the paved highway at 60 miles per hour. The dirt road was rough and full of potholes, sending violent vibrations through his truck as he fought to maintain control. Behind him, the pickup truck that had been alongside his cab was following onto the dirt road, its four-wheel drive giving it better traction on the loose surface. The white van had stopped at the highway, apparently unable or unwilling to continue the pursuit on rough terrain. Ahead, the oil pumping station appeared through the dust cloud raised by his truck. If he could reach the facility and find another way back to the highway, he might still escape this trap. But as Clifford approached the pumping station, he realized that his pursuers had anticipated this possibility as well. A fourth vehicle, a large SUV, was already positioned at the facility, blocking his access to the service roads that might have provided an alternate route. He was surrounded, outnumbered, and running out of options. The fuel thieves had planned this operation with military precision, anticipating every possible escape route and countering each one. Clifford brought his truck to a stop in the dusty yard of the pumping station, his engine idling as he considered his final options. Through his windshield, he could see armed men emerging from the vehicles that had boxed him in. The hunt was over, and he had lost. Clifford Hayes sat motionless in his cab as armed men emerged from the vehicles that had successfully boxed him into the oil pumping station. The dust cloud raised by his desperate escape attempt was settling around his Peterbilt, and through the clearing haze, he could see the full scope of the operation that had ensnared him. 4 vehicles formed a loose perimeter around his truck. The white van that had followed him from mile marker 127, the pickup truck that had tried to puncture his tires, the second pickup that had blocked the highway, and a black Suburban that had been waiting at the pumping station. At least 6 men were visible, all carrying weapons and moving with the coordinated precision of people who'd done this before. The leader appeared to be a tall, lean man in his late 30s who emerged from the driver's seat of the black Suburban. He wore faded jeans, work boots, and a denim shirt that had seen better days. But there was nothing casual about his demeanor. This was someone accustomed to command, someone who'd planned this operation down to the smallest detail. The man approached Clifford's truck with confident strides, a pistol visible in a shoulder holster beneath his shirt. He stopped about 10 feet from the driver's side door and called up to the cab. "Driver, shut down your engine and step out of the vehicle. Keep your hands visible at all times." Clifford's satellite communication system was still active, and he could hear Beulah's voice crackling through the speaker. "Clifford, State Patrol ETA is now 25 minutes. Stay calm and cooperate with their demands." 25 minutes. It might as well have been 25 hours. Clifford had no choice but to comply with the armed men's instructions and hope that somehow he could survive long enough for help to arrive. He shut down his engine and opened the cab door, climbing down slowly with his hands raised. The desert heat hit him immediately. Over 100 degrees with no shade and no wind. Sweat began beading on his forehead within seconds. "Name's Vernon," the leader said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that suggested Texas or Oklahoma origins. "Vernon Cates. I run this operation, and I want you to understand something right from the start. Nobody needs to get hurt here if everyone follows instructions." "What do you want?" Clifford asked, though he already knew the answer. $2 million worth of consumer electronics in your trailer. High-demand items that are easy to move and hard to trace. We've been tracking your shipment since it left El Paso. Vernon gestured to one of his men, who approached with what appeared to be a tablet computer. "We know exactly what you're carrying, which pallets have the highest value items, and how your trailer is secured. This isn't a random robbery, it's a business transaction." "I don't have the keys to the trailer locks," Clifford said. "Those get delivered with the cargo." Vernon smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Driver, I've been doing this for 4 years. I know every security protocol used by major shipping companies. Your dispatcher has override codes that can unlock any trailer in your fleet." He nodded toward the satellite communication system in Clifford's truck. "You're going to call your dispatcher and request those codes. Tell her you're conducting a routine inspection at the request of law enforcement." Clifford felt his heart sink. If Vernon knew about override codes, he wasn't dealing with opportunistic thieves. These were professionals who'd studied the industry's vulnerabilities and developed systematic methods for exploiting them. "And if I refuse, then we kill you and take the truck anyway. The override codes are programmed into the trailer's electronic systems. We can access them with the right equipment, but it's faster and cleaner if you cooperate." One of Vernon's men had been examining Clifford's truck while they talked. He approached and spoke quietly to Vernon, who nodded and turned back to Clifford. "My electronics specialist tells me your truck has enhanced GPS tracking and emergency communication systems. Very sophisticated setup. That's going to complicate our timeline." Vernon consulted his watch, then looked at the horizon where heat waves shimmered above the desert floor. "Law enforcement response time to this location is approximately 30 minutes. We need to be loaded and gone in 20. The efficiency was terrifying. Vernon's crew wasn't just stealing cargo. They were executing a precisely timed operation that accounted for every variable, including police response times and trucking company protocols. "Here's what's going to happen," Vernon continued. "You're going to call your dispatcher and request the override codes. While you're doing that, my crew is going to prep your trailer for rapid unloading. We've got a truck waiting 2 miles from here that will take the high-value items. The rest of the cargo stays with your truck." "They'll know something's wrong," Clifford said. "Dispatchers don't just give out override codes without verification. Which is why you're going to be very convincing. Tell them you've been stopped by federal agents conducting a drug interdiction operation. That usually gets dispatchers to cooperate quickly." Vernon's knowledge of industry procedures was extensive and disturbing. Someone had provided him with detailed information about how trucking companies operated, how dispatchers thought, and what lies would be most effective in specific situations. Clifford climbed back into his cab, acutely aware that several weapons were pointed at him. He activated his satellite communication system, hoping that Beulah would somehow understand the situation without him having to spell it out. "Continental Dispatch, this is Unit 23. Beulah's voice came through immediately. "Unit 23, this is Beulah. What's your status?" "I've been stopped by federal agents conducting a drug interdiction operation. They need the override codes for my trailer locks to complete their inspection." There was a pause that seemed to last forever. Beulah was an experienced dispatcher who'd handled hundreds of unusual situations, and Clifford hoped she would recognize that something was wrong. "Unit 23, I need to verify this request with the agents in charge. Standard protocol for federal stops." Vernon had been listening to the conversation through the truck's external speakers. He drew his pistol and pointed it directly at Clifford's head. "Tell her the agents don't have time for verification procedures. Tell her this is an emergency situation and you need those codes immediately." Clifford keyed his microphone again. "Beulah, the agents say they don't have time for verification. This is an emergency situation involving national security. I need those override codes right now." Another pause, shorter this time. "Copy, Unit 23. Override codes are 779 Alpha Charlie 6 6. Vernon nodded approvingly and gestured for his men to move towards the trailer. "Smart lady. She just saved your life." As Vernon's crew began the process of breaking into the trailer, Clifford found himself studying their operation with professional interest, despite his fear. These weren't desperate criminals making it up as they went along. They were specialists who'd turned cargo theft into a science. The man with the tablet was scanning the trailer's electronic locks, inputting the override codes that Beulah had provided. Another crew member was setting up what appeared to be a portable loading dock, complete with a hydraulic lift system. A third man was consulting shipping manifest, probably deciding which pallets had the highest value-to-weight ratio for quick removal. "You've done this before," Clifford observed. 63 successful operations over the past 4 years, Vernon replied without boasting. "Average take is 1.2 million per truck. We target high-value electronics, pharmaceuticals, and luxury goods. Always on remote highways, always with multiple escape routes planned." "How do you know which trucks to target?" Vernon smiled. "That's the beauty of modern logistics. Everything is tracked, recorded, and transmitted. Shipping manifests, route plans, cargo values. It's all available if you know where to look." One of Vernon's men called out from the trailer. "Boss, we're in. Cargo matches the manifest exactly. 47 pallets of consumer electronics, estimated street value 2.3 million. Load the top 15 pallets," Vernon instructed. "Samsung phones, Apple tablets, PlayStation consoles, leave the lower value items." The loading process was remarkably efficient. Vernon's crew had obviously practiced this operation, using coordinated movements and specialized equipment to transfer cargo from Clifford's trailer to a waiting box truck that had appeared on the access road. As they worked, Vernon continued his conversation with Clifford. "You want to know the real irony? The trucking industry's security measures actually make our job easier. All that GPS tracking and electronic monitoring creates predictable patterns. Dispatchers follow standard protocols. Drivers react to authority figures in consistent ways. So you just study the system and exploit it." "Exactly. Most cargo thieves are amateurs who grab whatever they can and hope for the best. We're professionals who target specific shipments and plan every detail months in advance." Clifford watched millions of dollars in merchandise being transferred to the thieves' truck with assembly line precision. The entire operation would be completed in less than 20 minutes, well ahead of any law enforcement response. "What happens to me when you're finished?" Vernon consulted his watch again. "That depends on how cooperative you've been. Right now, you're looking at being left here with a disabled truck and a story to tell the police. But if you cause problems..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. The loading was nearly complete when one of Vernon's men approached with urgent news. "Boss, we've got company. Civilian vehicle approaching from the highway." Vernon cursed and pulled out binoculars, scanning the access road that led from Highway 285 to the pumping station. "White sedan, single occupant. Could be a pumping station worker coming to check the equipment." "What do we do?" "Stick to the plan. Johnson, get ready to intercept that vehicle. Everyone else, finish loading and prep for immediate departure." Clifford felt his heart race. An innocent bystander was about to drive into the middle of an armed robbery, and there was nothing he could do to warn them. Vernon's crew was already moving to defensive positions, treating the approaching vehicle as a potential threat to their operation. The white sedan continued up the access road, apparently unaware of the danger ahead. Through the heat shimmer, Clifford could see it was an older model car, probably driven by someone checking on the oil pumping equipment or reading meters. "Driver, get back in your cab," Vernon ordered. "Keep your mouth shut and your hands visible. This complication doesn't change our timeline." Clifford climbed into his truck as the sedan approached the pumping station. Through his windshield, he watched one of Vernon's men position himself behind a concrete barrier, weapon drawn and ready to confront the innocent driver. The sedan pulled to a stop about 50 yards away, and an elderly woman got out. She appeared to be in her 70s, wearing a simple dress and carrying what looked like a clipboard. Probably a local resident employed to check the pumping equipment on a regular schedule. Vernon's man approached her with his weapon concealed but ready. Clifford couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see the woman's confusion and growing fear as she realized she'd stumbled into something dangerous. "Boss," the man called back to Vernon, "she's a meter reader for the oil company. Says she comes out here every Thursday to check the equipment." Vernon cursed again. Killing a truck driver who was carrying valuable cargo was one thing. Murder was sometimes a cost of doing business in the cargo theft world. But killing an innocent elderly woman would bring the kind of law enforcement attention that could destroy his entire operation. "Bring her over here," Vernon decided. "We'll have to take her with us until we're clear of the area." As the woman was escorted toward the group of vehicles, Clifford realized that the situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. Vernon's crew was now dealing with 2 hostages, and the knowledge that their carefully planned operation had been compromised by an unexpected witness. The loading was completed just as the woman reached Vernon's position. Clifford could see her clearly now, a small, frightened woman who'd probably never been involved in anything more dangerous than a church bake sale. "Ma'am, I'm sorry you got caught up in this," Vernon said, his voice actually showing genuine regret. "But you're going to have to come with us for a little while. As long as you cooperate, you won't be harmed." The woman nodded silently, clearly too terrified to speak. Vernon turned back to Clifford. "Change of plans, driver. You're coming with us too. Can't leave you here to talk to the police immediately." "My truck will be fine. We're not stealing your truck, just borrowing some cargo. Insurance will cover the loss, and you'll have a hell of a story to tell." Vernon's men were already securing the stolen merchandise in their box truck and preparing to abandon the pumping station. The entire operation had taken less than 25 minutes from start to finish. As Clifford was forced into one of the pickup trucks alongside the terrified meter reader, he realized that his nightmare was far from over. Vernon's crew was professional enough to avoid unnecessary killing, but they were also ruthless enough to eliminate witnesses if their escape was threatened. The convoy of vehicles pulled away from the pumping station, leaving Clifford's disabled Peterbilt sitting alone in the desert. Through the rear window of the pickup truck, he watched his livelihood disappear into the heat shimmer. Somewhere ahead lay either freedom or death, and Clifford had no way of knowing which one Vernon would ultimately choose. The convoy of stolen vehicles traveled north on a network of dirt roads that paralleled Highway 285, staying far enough from the main thoroughfare to avoid detection by responding law enforcement. Clifford Hayes sat in the back seat of Vernon's pickup truck, his hands zip-tied behind his back, watching the New Mexico desert roll past through tinted windows. Beside him sat the elderly woman who'd had the misfortune of arriving at the oil pumping station during the robbery. She'd introduced herself in a whispered voice as Beulah Martinez, a 73-year-old retired school teacher who supplemented her pension by reading meters for the local oil company. Her presence had complicated Vernon's carefully planned operation, and Clifford could sense the tension that complication had created among the thieves. "How much further?" one of Vernon's men asked from the front passenger seat. 20 miles to the transfer point," Vernon replied, checking his GPS device. "We'll swap the cargo to the long-haul trucks there, then decide what to do with our passengers." Clifford exchanged glances with Beulah, recognizing the ominous implication of Vernon's words. Professional cargo thieves couldn't afford to leave witnesses who could identify them to law enforcement. The question wasn't whether they would be killed, but when and how. Through the pickup's rear window, Clifford could see the box truck containing his stolen cargo following close behind. $2 million worth of electronics that would disappear into black market distribution networks, leaving Continental Logistics to absorb the loss and his own driving record permanently tainted by the theft. The convoy turned onto an even more remote track that wound through low hills dotted with scrub brush and abandoned mining claims. This was backcountry that rarely saw human visitors, perfect for transferring stolen goods without witnesses or interference. "Been doing this route long?" Clifford asked Vernon, hoping to gather information that might prove useful later. 4 years, Vernon replied without turning around. "Started small with single truck hits, but the real money is in systematic operations. Target high-value cargo, plan multiple escape routes, maintain transfer points in remote locations." "Sounds like you've got it figured out. The trucking industry makes it easy. All that tracking and communication technology creates predictable patterns. Dispatchers follow standard protocols. Insurance companies focus on recovering cargo rather than pursuing thieves." Vernon's casual discussion of his criminal methodology was chilling. This wasn't a desperate criminal acting on impulse. This was someone who'd turned cargo theft into a profitable business model. The convoy crested a hill and descended into a shallow valley where several large trucks were parked near what appeared to be an abandoned ranch. Semi-trailers were positioned to conceal the transfer operation from casual observation, and Clifford could see additional armed men moving around the vehicles. "Transfer point," Vernon announced. "We'll have your cargo loaded and moving again within 30 minutes. As they pulled into the hidden compound, Clifford studied the layout carefully. At least 12 men were visible, along with 6 large trucks and several smaller support vehicles. This wasn't just a cargo theft ring, it was a sophisticated criminal organization with the resources to conduct major operations. Vernon's pickup stopped near a trailer that appeared to serve as a command center. Clifford and Beulah were ordered out of the vehicle and escorted to a small storage building where they could be held while the cargo transfer took place. The building was a concrete block structure with no windows and a single heavy door. Inside were several chairs, a table, and evidence that other people had been held here before. Water bottles, food wrappers, and scratches on the walls that suggested previous prisoners had tried to escape. "Sit down and stay quiet," one of Vernon's men instructed. "Boss will decide what to do with you after the cargo's transferred." The door slammed shut, and Clifford heard the sound of a heavy lock being engaged. He was alone with Beulah in what might very well be their tomb. "I'm sorry you got caught up in this," Clifford said quietly. "Wrong place. Wrong time." Beulah shook her head. "Not your fault. I've been reading those meters for 6 years. Never had any trouble before." Despite their desperate situation, Clifford found himself impressed by the elderly woman's composure. She was frightened, but not panicked, alert, but not hysterical. There was a toughness to her that suggested she'd survived difficult situations before. "You think they'll let us go?" Beulah asked. Clifford considered lying to comfort her, but decided she deserved honesty. "I don't know. Professional thieves usually avoid killing unless they have to, but we can both identify them. Then we need to find a way out of here." Clifford examined their prison more carefully. The concrete walls were solid, The door was heavy steel, and there were no windows or alternative exits. But the building was old, and age might have created weaknesses that weren't immediately obvious. Using his shoulder against the wall, Clifford pushed against various sections, feeling for loose blocks or structural damage. Near the back corner, he found what he was looking for: a section where the mortar had deteriorated, leaving gaps between the concrete blocks. "Help me with this," he whispered to Beulah. Working together, they began loosening the mortar around several blocks using pieces of broken concrete from the floor. The work was slow and difficult, made worse by Clifford's zip-tied hands, but gradually they created enough space to remove one of the blocks entirely. The hole was small, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, but it opened onto the desert behind the building. If they could escape without being seen, they might be able to reach the highway and flag down help. "You go first," Clifford told Beulah. "I'll follow, and try to replace the block so they don't notice immediately." Beulah squeezed through the opening with surprising agility for her age. Clifford followed, scraping his shoulders against the rough concrete as he forced himself through the narrow gap. Behind them, he could hear the sounds of the cargo transfer operation: diesel engines, hydraulic equipment, and shouted instructions. They were in the open desert now, with minimal cover between their position and the highway approximately 2 miles away. The sun was beginning to set, which would provide some concealment but also make navigation more difficult. "Can you walk 2 miles?" Clifford asked. "I've been walking these hills since I was a girl," Beulah replied. "Lead the way." They began moving away from the compound, staying low and using whatever cover was available. The desert terrain was rough, with loose rocks and thorny vegetation that made silent movement difficult. Every few minutes, they stopped to listen for sounds of pursuit. After 30 minutes of careful progress, they heard shouts from the direction of the compound. Their escape had been discovered. "They'll come after us with vehicles," Clifford said. "We need to find somewhere to hide." Beulah pointed toward a rocky outcropping about a quarter-mile ahead. "There's caves in those rocks. I used to explore them as a child." They increased their pace, racing against time and the approaching sound of engines. Behind them, headlights were sweeping the desert as Vernon's men began their search. The rocky outcropping was honeycombed with small caves and crevices carved by centuries of wind and water erosion. Beulah led Clifford to a narrow opening that was invisible from most angles, the kind of hiding place only someone familiar with the terrain would know about. They squeezed into the cave just as the first search vehicle passed their position, its headlights probing the darkness less than 50 yards from their hiding place. "Think they saw us," Clifford whispered. "No, but they'll search systematically. We can't stay here long." Through the cave opening, they could see multiple vehicles spreading out across the desert, their headlights creating a grid pattern as they searched for the escaped prisoners. Vernon's organization had the manpower and equipment to conduct a thorough search, but the darkness was working in the fugitives' favor. "I know these hills," Beulah said quietly. "There's an old ranch road about a mile north that connects to Highway 285. If we can reach it without being seen, we might find help." "You know the way in the dark? I grew up here. My father worked these oil leases for 30 years. I can navigate by the stars if I have to." It was a desperate plan, but it was their only option. Staying hidden meant eventual discovery, and discovery meant death. They had to keep moving and hope that Beulah's knowledge of the terrain would give them an advantage over their pursuers. They waited until the nearest search vehicle moved past their position, then slipped out of the cave and began working their way north through the rocky terrain. Beulah moved with the confidence of someone who knew every boulder and wash in the area, while Clifford followed as quietly as possible. The stars were brilliant in the clear desert sky, providing just enough light to navigate without using flashlights that would reveal their position. Behind them, the search continued with methodical precision, but the searchers were now concentrating on areas further from the compound. After an hour of careful movement, they reached the old ranch road Beulah had mentioned. It was barely more than 2 ruts in the desert, but it was clearly a route that led toward the highway. "How much further?" Clifford asked. "Maybe 30 minutes to the highway if we follow the road, but it's exposed, no cover if they spot us." They had to make a choice. Take the faster but more dangerous route, or continue cross-country and risk being caught by the systematic search. Clifford was about to suggest they stick to the rough terrain when they heard something that changed everything. Sirens, multiple sirens, approaching from the direction of Highway 285. "State Patrol," Clifford said. "Beulah must have gotten through to them about the theft. Or someone found your truck at the pumping station." Either way, law enforcement was responding in force. If Clifford and Beulah could reach the highway and make contact with the responding officers, they would be safe. But they had to get there before Vernon's crew decided to cut their losses and eliminate all evidence of the operation. They began jogging along the ranch road, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind them, they could see the lights of the search vehicles turning back toward the compound as Vernon's men realized that law enforcement was closing in. The highway appeared ahead of them, marked by the lights of multiple police vehicles converging on the area. Clifford could see the distinctive light bars of state patrol cars, sheriff's department vehicles, and what appeared to be federal law enforcement units. "Almost there," he gasped, his lungs burning from the unaccustomed exertion in the thin desert air. But as they approached the last quarter-mile to the highway, headlights appeared behind them on the ranch road. One of Vernon's vehicles had spotted them and was racing to intercept them before they could reach safety. "Run!" Clifford shouted. They sprinted the final distance to the highway, waving their arms and shouting as they reached the pavement. A state patrol officer saw them immediately and began running in their direction, his weapon drawn. The pursuing vehicle skidded to a stop at the edge of the highway, and Clifford caught a glimpse of Vernon himself behind the wheel. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Clifford saw the cold calculation of a man deciding whether killing 2 witnesses was worth the risk of engaging law enforcement. Vernon made his choice. The vehicle backed away from the highway and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Clifford and Beulah in the protective custody of the New Mexico State Patrol. As paramedics checked them for injuries and investigators began taking their statements, Clifford learned that his dispatcher, Beulah Morrison, had coordinated a massive law enforcement response after losing contact with his truck. The theft had triggered alerts across multiple agencies, and Vernon's operation was now the target of a federal investigation. "Did you get them?" Clifford asked the lead investigator. "Some of them. We've got the compound surrounded, but several vehicles escaped before we could seal the area. Your cargo's been recovered, though." It was a partial victory. Vernon's organization had been disrupted, but the man himself had escaped to rebuild his operation elsewhere. Clifford realized that his ordeal was over, but the threat Vernon represented would continue until law enforcement could finally bring him to justice. As he sat in the back of an ambulance, watching investigators process the crime scene, Clifford found himself thinking about the elderly woman who'd helped save his life. Beulah Martinez had shown more courage and resourcefulness than people half her age, proving that heroism could be found in the most unexpected places. The highway vultures had been driven off for now, but they would return. They always did. Until then, Clifford had a story to tell and cargo to deliver, if he could find the strength to climb back behind the wheel of a truck. 6 weeks after the New Mexico incident, Clifford Hayes was back on the road, hauling a load of construction equipment from Phoenix to Denver. The physical injuries from his ordeal had healed, but the psychological scars remained. Every unmarked van in his mirrors triggered anxiety. Every remote stretch of highway brought back memories of Vernon Cates and his professional crew of cargo thieves. Continental Logistics had been supportive throughout his recovery, providing counseling and allowing him to choose his routes for the first month back on duty. The company's insurance had covered the stolen cargo, and Clifford's heroic actions during the robbery had earned him recognition from industry safety organizations. But none of that changed the fundamental reality. Vernon Cates was still out there, still operating, still hunting trucks on America's highways. The federal investigation had dismantled the transfer operation in New Mexico, arresting 8 members of Vernon's crew and recovering equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But Vernon himself had vanished, along with his core leadership team and the profits from years of systematic cargo theft. Clifford's satellite communication system crackled with Beulah Morrison's familiar voice as he approached Albuquerque on I-40. Unit 23, this is dispatch. You've got a priority message from federal law enforcement. Copy, Beulah. What's the nature of the message? Agent Rodriguez from the FBI task force wants you to call in immediately. Says it's urgent and relates to your New Mexico case. Clifford felt his pulse quicken. He'd testified before a federal grand jury 3 weeks earlier, providing detailed information about Vernon's operation and methods. The agents had been optimistic about tracking down the remaining members of the theft ring, but they'd warned that Vernon was intelligent enough to stay ahead of traditional investigative techniques. Patch me through to Agent Rodriguez. A new voice came through the satellite system, professional, urgent, with the clipped efficiency of federal law enforcement. Mr. Hayes, this is Agent Rodriguez. We've had a significant development in your case. Did you find Vernon? Not exactly, but we've intercepted communications suggesting he's planning another major operation. Intelligence indicates he's targeting a specific truck carrying high-value cargo on a remote highway in Colorado. Clifford felt ice in his veins despite the Arizona heat. When? Tonight. The target is a truck carrying pharmaceutical supplies from Denver to Durango. Street value of the cargo is estimated at $3 million. What does this have to do with me? Vernon's communications specifically mentioned you, Mr. Hayes. He's obsessed with what he calls unfinished business from the New Mexico operation. We believe he's planning to target you personally during this robbery. The implications hit Clifford like a physical blow. Vernon wasn't just planning another cargo theft. He was using it as bait to draw Clifford into a personal confrontation. The professional thief had taken their encounter in New Mexico as a personal affront to his reputation. You want me to stay off the road? Actually, we want you to help us catch him. The target truck is being driven by an undercover federal agent. We'll be monitoring the situation with full tactical support. But Vernon has proven he can detect standard surveillance techniques. Agent Rodriguez paused before continuing. Your knowledge of his methods and psychology could be crucial to the operation's success. You're the only person who survived direct contact with his crew and escaped. Clifford considered the proposal carefully. Every instinct told him to refuse, to stay as far away from Vernon Cates as possible. But the memory of Beulah Martinez's courage during their escape kept nagging at him. The elderly woman had faced mortal danger without hesitation, because it was the right thing to do. What exactly are you asking me to do? Drive the decoy route. We'll position you on Highway 160 between Durango and Cortez, about 30 miles behind the target truck. If Vernon takes the bait and attacks the undercover vehicle, you'll be close enough to provide support but far enough away to stay safe. And if he ignores the target truck and comes after me directly, then we'll have multiple tactical teams in position to protect you and apprehend his crew. It was a dangerous plan that relied on Vernon's psychology and the assumption that federal agents could outthink a man who'd been evading capture for years. But it was also an opportunity to end the threat that Vernon represented to every truck driver on America's highways. I'll do it. Excellent. Report to the Federal Building in Denver at 0800 tomorrow for briefing and equipment. And Mr. Hayes, this operation is classified. Don't discuss it with anyone, including your dispatcher. The connection ended, leaving Clifford alone with the weight of his decision. Tomorrow night, he would deliberately place himself in the path of the most dangerous cargo thief in the Southwest. Either Vernon Cates would finally be brought to justice, or Clifford would become another casualty in the ongoing war between thieves and the drivers who kept America's commerce moving. 24 hours later, Clifford was behind the wheel of a specially equipped Kenworth, traveling west on Highway 160 through the rugged Colorado mountains. Hidden cameras and communication equipment had been installed throughout the truck, and federal agents in unmarked vehicles were maintaining distant surveillance. The cargo in his trailer was genuine, medical supplies destined for hospitals in Cortez, but the truck itself was essentially a mobile command center for the federal operation. Every conversation, every movement, every mile of highway was being monitored and recorded. Unit 23, this is Control. Agent Rodriguez's voice crackled through the encrypted communication system. Target vehicle is approximately 30 miles ahead of your position. No suspicious activity detected so far. Copy, Control. All systems normal on my end. The highway wound through spectacular mountain scenery, but Clifford found it difficult to appreciate the beauty while waiting for an attack that might come at any moment. Vernon's crew had proven they could appear anywhere, strike with precision, and disappear before law enforcement could respond. As darkness fell over the Colorado mountains, Clifford's anxiety increased. Night operations were Vernon's specialty, and the remote highway provided perfect cover for an ambush. Every set of headlights in his mirrors could be the beginning of the attack. At mile marker 47, everything changed. Unit 23, we've lost contact with the target vehicle. Agent Rodriguez's voice was tense with concern. Last transmission was 5 minutes ago from their position near Mancos. Technical problem or hostile action? Unknown. We're moving tactical teams to investigate, but it's going to take 15 minutes to reach their last known position. Clifford felt the familiar chill of recognition. Vernon's crew was capable of disabling communications and isolating targets before launching their attacks. The undercover federal agent was probably already in custody or worse. Control, I'm seeing headlights approaching from behind. Multiple vehicles moving fast. Copy, Unit 23. We're tracking them on satellite. 3 vehicles consistent with Vernon's known operational pattern. This was it. Vernon had taken the federal bait and was now moving to complete his unfinished business with Clifford. The question was whether the tactical teams could reach them before the attack succeeded. The pursuing vehicles were gaining rapidly, their headlights growing larger in Clifford's mirrors with each passing second. Unlike his first encounter with Vernon's crew, this time he was prepared and supported. But he was also alone on a dark mountain highway with nowhere to run. Unit 23, maintain current speed en route. Do not attempt evasive action. Tactical teams are closing on your position. Easy for Agent Rodriguez to say from the safety of his command post. Clifford was the one driving into the teeth of Vernon's assault, trusting that federal agents could protect him from men who'd been outmaneuvering law enforcement for years. The first attack came without warning. A pickup truck pulled alongside Clifford's cab, and he could see muzzle flashes as someone opened fire on his tires. But the truck's run-flat tires absorbed the impacts without losing pressure, allowing him to maintain control and speed. Taking fire from the right side, Clifford reported, his voice remarkably calm despite the circumstances. Copy, Unit 23. Tactical teams are 2 minutes out. 2 minutes might as well be 2 hours. The pickup truck was joined by a second vehicle, the white van from the New Mexico operation. Vernon's crew was boxing him in, preparing for the same systematic assault that had succeeded in the desert. But this time, Clifford wasn't helpless. The truck's armor could withstand small arms fire, and its enhanced communication systems kept him in constant contact with federal backup. Most importantly, he knew what to expect from Vernon's crew. The white van moved to block the highway ahead, just as it had during the roadblock in New Mexico. But Clifford was ready for the maneuver. Instead of slowing down, he accelerated directly toward the blocking vehicle, counting on its driver to lose his nerve and move aside. The gamble worked. The van swerved away at the last second, allowing Clifford to maintain his speed and position on the highway. Behind him, he could hear the approaching sound of helicopters as federal air support arrived on scene. Unit 23, be advised we have eyes on your position. Multiple hostiles identified. Weapons free for tactical teams. The night erupted in chaos as federal agents engaged Vernon's crew from multiple directions. Helicopters swept the highway with searchlights while ground units moved to surround the attacking vehicles. What had begun as a carefully planned ambush had become a running battle on a Colorado mountain highway. Through his side mirror, Clifford saw Vernon's pickup truck attempting to escape down a side road. The man who'd haunted his nightmares for 6 weeks was trying to slip away once again, leaving his crew to face the consequences of their failed operation. Control, Vernon's vehicle is attempting to escape via Forest Service Road 234, single pickup truck heading south into the mountains. Copy, Unit 23. We have a pursuit helicopter moving to intercept. But Clifford knew that Vernon was too smart to be caught by conventional pursuit tactics. The man had survived as a fugitive for years by anticipating law enforcement methods and staying one step ahead of his pursuers. On impulse, Clifford took the next exit and began following the Forest Service road that Vernon had used for his escape. The narrow mountain track was barely wide enough for his truck, but years of driving in difficult conditions had prepared him for the challenge. Unit 23, what are you doing? Return to the highway immediately. Vernon knows these mountains. He's got escape routes planned that your helicopters can't follow. I'm going after him. It was a desperate decision that violated every protocol the federal agents had established. But Clifford had spent 6 weeks thinking about Vernon Cates, studying his methods, understanding his psychology. The cargo thief was a creature of habit who always had multiple escape plans prepared. The Forest Service road wound deeper into the mountains, climbing steadily through dense stands of pine and aspen. Clifford's headlights carved through the darkness, revealing a track that was clearly maintained but rarely used. This was exactly the kind of route Vernon would have scouted in advance. After 20 minutes of climbing, Clifford reached a clearing where several roads intersected. In the center of the clearing, Vernon's pickup truck sat empty, its engine still running. The man himself was nowhere to be seen. Clifford stopped his truck and climbed down, his hand resting on the emergency radio that connected him to federal coordination. The clearing was silent, except for the sound of wind through the trees and the idle of Vernon's abandoned vehicle. "Looking for me?" The voice came from the tree line, calm and conversational. Vernon Cates stepped into the glow of Clifford's headlights, no longer the confident criminal mastermind, but a desperate fugitive who'd finally run out of options. "It's over, Vernon. Federal agents will be here in minutes." "I know. That's why we need to settle this now, just between us." Vernon was carrying a pistol, but he held it loosely at his side rather than pointing it at Clifford. There was something almost resigned about his posture, as if he'd accepted that his years of freedom were finally ending. "You cost me everything in New Mexico," Vernon continued. 4 years of building an organization, millions in profits, a reputation for professional competence, all destroyed because one truck driver refused to be a victim. You brought it on yourself. How many drivers did you terrorize? How many families did you destroy? I was providing a service, demonstrating the vulnerabilities in the system, forcing the industry to improve its security measures. Even facing capture, Vernon was rationalizing his crimes as some kind of public service. The man was completely disconnected from the reality of the damage he'd caused. The only thing you demonstrated was that some people will use any excuse to justify hurting others. Vernon raised his pistol, but the movement was half-hearted, more symbolic than threatening. You know what the funny thing is? I actually respect you. Most drivers would have cooperated, taken their loss, and moved on. But you fought back. You cost me everything, but you did it with courage. The sound of helicopters was growing louder, approaching the clearing from multiple directions. Vernon's time was running out, and both men knew it. "Throw down the weapon and surrender," Clifford said. "There's been enough violence." "You're probably right." Vernon tossed the pistol aside and raised his hands as federal agents rappelled from helicopters into the clearing. The manhunt that had consumed 6 weeks and countless resources was finally over. As Vernon was taken into custody, he called out to Clifford one final time. "You won this round, driver, but there are others like me out there. The highways will never be completely safe." It was probably true. As long as trucks carried valuable cargo across remote highways, there would be predators waiting to exploit any vulnerability. But Vernon Cates would never again terrorize innocent drivers, and his capture would serve as a warning to others who might consider following his example. Driving back toward civilization with a federal escort, Clifford found himself thinking about the elderly woman who'd helped save his life in New Mexico. Beulah Martinez had shown him that courage could emerge from the most unexpected sources, and that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary circumstances when it mattered most. The highway vultures had been defeated, but the road stretched on ahead, endless, challenging, and always holding the promise of another mile, another delivery, another chance to prove that the men and women who kept America's commerce moving were stronger than those who sought to prey upon them. Vernon Cates was going to prison, but the highways belonged to the truckers. The weather forecast had called for light snow, but as Elmer Blackwood guided his Freightliner Cascadia up the winding grades of Colorado's Wolf Creek Pass, the reality outside his windshield told a different story. What had started as scattered flakes 2 hours ago had intensified into a driving blizzard that reduced visibility to mere yards and covered the mountain highway with several inches of treacherous snow. At 54, Elmer had been driving professionally for 19 years, and he'd hauled freight through every kind of weather the American West could produce. But the storm developing around him was something special. The kind of early December blizzard that could strand travelers for days and turn familiar highways into death traps. His cargo was routine but urgent. Medical supplies and pharmaceuticals bound for hospitals in Alamosa and Pueblo. The load was worth nearly $500,000 and included medications that patients were depending on for treatment. Continental Medical Transport had impressed upon him the importance of maintaining schedule, but they'd also given him authority to make safety decisions based on road conditions. Right now, those conditions were deteriorating by the minute. "Breaker 19, this is Mountain Man running eastbound on 160 over Wolf Creek," Elmer transmitted on his CB radio. "Any drivers got their ears on about current conditions ahead?" Static filled the channel. Elmer tried again on different frequencies, but received no response. The combination of terrain and weather was interfering with radio communications, leaving him isolated on one of Colorado's most dangerous mountain passes. His dashboard clock showed 3:47 p.m. as he approached the summit at 10,800 feet above sea level. Daylight was already fading in the storm, and the temperature had dropped to 12 degrees below zero. If he became stranded at this elevation, hypothermia would become a deadly threat within hours. The Freightliner's engine was running strong, its diesel fuel treated with anti-gel additives, and the cooling system equipped with winter-grade antifreeze. but even the best-maintained truck could succumb to extreme weather if the conditions became severe enough. At mile marker 167, Elmer encountered his first real warning sign. A passenger car sat abandoned in the right lane, its hazard lights blinking weakly through the accumulating snow. The vehicle was completely buried except for its roof and the faint glow of its emergency flashers. Elmer keyed his emergency radio, trying to reach the Colorado Department of Transportation. CDOT, this is commercial vehicle on Highway 160 eastbound. I've got an abandoned passenger car at mile marker 167, appears to be unoccupied. No response. The storm was creating a communication dead zone that extended across the entire mountain pass. As he continued climbing toward the summit, Elmer noticed that his truck was working harder to maintain speed. Snow was accumulating on the highway faster than the Colorado Department of Transportation could clear it, and ice was forming underneath the snowpack. Even with chains on his drive wheels, traction was becoming marginal. The smart thing to do would be to find a safe place to park and wait out the storm. But the summit area of Wolf Creek Pass offered no services, no shelter, and no protection from the wind that was now howling across the exposed ridgeline at over 50 miles per hour. His only option was to continue over the pass and descend to the relative safety of the San Luis Valley, where the elevation was lower and emergency services would be more readily available. But that meant navigating 10 miles of mountain highway in conditions that were rapidly becoming impossible. At 4:15 p.m., Elmer reached the summit and began the treacherous descent down the eastern slope. The grade was steep, 7% in some sections, and the combination of snow, ice, and wind created conditions that challenged even his considerable experience. He was using his engine brake to control speed when he felt the first indication of real trouble. The truck's anti-lock braking system activated, indicating that his wheels were beginning to lose traction despite the chains. If he lost control on this grade, his 80,000-pound truck would become an unstoppable projectile careening down the mountainside. Elmer downshifted to reduce his reliance on the brakes, but the steep grade and slippery conditions made speed control increasingly difficult. His speedometer showed 25 miles per hour, but even that felt too fast for the available traction. At mile marker 152, disaster struck. A sudden gust of wind, estimated later at over 70 miles per hour, caught Elmer's trailer and pushed it sideways. The truck began to jackknife, its trailer sliding towards the guardrail while the cab fought to maintain its line on the highway. Elmer's training kicked in automatically. He turned into the skid, released the brakes, and tried to regain control using only the engine and transmission. For several terrifying seconds, the truck slid sideways down the mountain highway with its trailer completely perpendicular to the cab. Then the guardrail stopped the slide with a grinding crash of metal against metal. Elmer's truck came to rest, blocking both lanes of Highway 160, its trailer wedged against the guardrail and its cab angled across the center line. Steam rose from damaged components, and he could hear the hiss of escaping air from the truck's pneumatic systems. He shut down the engine and activated his hazard lights, then climbed out to assess the damage. The wind nearly knocked him off his feet, and the cold cut through his insulated coveralls like a knife. Snow was falling so heavily that he could barely see the outline of his own truck. The trailer had sustained significant damage where it had struck the guardrail. Several panels were crushed, and one of the rear axles appeared to be bent. Worse, hydraulic fluid was leaking from the trailer's liftgate system, creating an environmental hazard on the snow-covered highway. But the most serious problem was the truck's position. It was completely blocking the highway in both directions, creating a deadly obstacle for any other vehicles attempting to navigate the pass. In these weather conditions, another driver might not see the obstruction until it was too late to stop. Elmer climbed back into his cab and tried his communication systems again, The CB radio produced only static. His cell phone showed no signal, and even the satellite emergency beacon seemed to be malfunctioning. He was completely cut off from the outside world, stranded on a mountain pass in the middle of a blizzard. The temperature inside the cab was already dropping. Without the engine running, the truck's heating system was ineffective, and Elmer could see his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. He had emergency blankets and some food in his survival kit, but no way to heat the cab safely without risking carbon monoxide poisoning. As darkness fell over Wolf Creek Pass, Elmer faced a series of grim calculations. The storm showed no signs of abating, and highway department plows would not attempt to clear the pass until conditions improved. He could try to survive in his truck until rescue arrived, but that might be days away. Alternatively, he could attempt to walk to safety, but that meant abandoning his truck and cargo while hiking through a blizzard at over 10,000 feet elevation. Neither option offered good odds of survival. At 6:30 p.m., just as Elmer was beginning to think his situation couldn't get worse, he saw lights approaching through the storm. Someone was driving up the mountain from the east, apparently unaware of the obstruction ahead. Elmer grabbed his emergency flares and climbed out of his truck, fighting against the wind to position himself where the approaching vehicle could see him. The lights were moving slowly, which suggested the driver was being cautious about the road conditions. As the vehicle drew closer, Elmer could see it was a large pickup truck with a snowplow blade mounted on the front. The truck stopped about 50 yards from Elmer's position, and two men got out. "You okay, driver?" one of them called through the wind. "Truck's damaged and blocking the road," Elmer shouted back. "Been trying to get help for 2 hours, but communications are down." The two men approached carefully, their faces obscured by winter gear. The first man appeared to be in his 40s, tall and heavy-set, wearing insulated coveralls and a knit cap. The second was younger and thinner, but moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to mountain conditions. "I'm Norbert," the first man said when they reached Elmer's position. "This is my partner, Jake. We're with the county road department. Been checking conditions on the back roads." Relief flooded through Elmer. Official help had arrived, and these men would know how to coordinate a proper rescue operation. "Thank God," Elmer said. "I was starting to think I'd be stuck here all night." Norbert examined the damaged truck with a professional eye. "Looks like you caught the guardrail pretty good. Trailer's definitely not going anywhere without a heavy wrecker. Can you radio for a tow truck?" "Radios aren't working in this storm, but we've got a warming hut about 5 miles down the mountain. You can wait there while we figure out how to get your truck moved." The offer was tempting. The thought of sitting in a warm building while professionals handled the recovery of his truck was exactly what Elmer needed to hear. But something about the situation nagged at him. "What about my cargo? I can't just abandon $500,000 worth of medical supplies. Truck's not going anywhere in this storm." Jake spoke for the first time, his voice younger than his partner's. "Nobody's going to steal anything in a blizzard at 10,000 feet elevation." That was probably true, but Elmer had been driving professionally long enough to know that leaving cargo unattended was a serious violation of company policy. Continental Medical Transport had specific procedures for emergency situations, and abandoning the truck wasn't one of them. "I appreciate the offer," Elmer said, "but I need to stay with my truck until proper arrangements are made." Norbert and Jake exchanged glances. There was something about their reaction that struck Elmer as odd. Disappointment, maybe, or frustration. "Driver, you're talking about spending the night in a truck with no heat in sub-zero temperatures," Norbert said. "That's not brave, it's suicide. I've got survival gear. I can make it until morning if I have to." "No, you can't." Jake's voice had taken on an edge that hadn't been there before. "People die in these conditions. We're offering to save your life, and you're too stubborn to accept help." The change in tone was subtle, but unmistakable. What had started as a rescue operation was beginning to feel like pressure, and Elmer's instincts were sending warning signals that he couldn't ignore. "I appreciate what you're trying to do," he said carefully, "but I'm staying with my truck." Norbert stepped closer, and for the first time, Elmer could see his face clearly in the glow of the emergency flares. The expression he saw there wasn't the concern of a rescuer. It was the calculation of a predator. "That's unfortunate," Norbert said quietly, "because you're coming with us whether you want to or not." Before Elmer could react, Jake moved behind him while Norbert produced something from his coat. The last thing Elmer saw before the world went dark was the metallic glint of a stun gun crackling with electricity. When consciousness returned, he was lying on a concrete floor in what appeared to be an abandoned building. His hands were zip-tied behind his back, and his head throbbed from the effects of the electrical shock. Through a dirty window he could see snow still falling heavily outside. But more disturbing was what he could see through an open doorway. His truck, or rather his empty truck. The trailer doors were open, and men were carrying boxes out of the cargo area. Norbert and Jake weren't county road workers. They were thieves who used the cover of mountain storms to rob stranded truckers, and Elmer had walked directly into their trap. The worst part was that nobody knew where he was, and in this weather nobody would be looking for him until the storm cleared. By then, his cargo would be gone, and he might be dead. The winter trap had closed around him, and escape seemed impossible. Elmer Blackwood lay motionless on the concrete floor, feigning unconsciousness while he assessed his situation through half-closed eyes. The building appeared to be an abandoned maintenance facility, probably dating from the construction of Highway 160 decades earlier. Concrete walls, exposed rafters, and the smell of old motor oil suggested it had once been used to service highway equipment. Through the open doorway, he could see his Freightliner still positioned across the highway, but now it was surrounded by activity. At least 4 men were systematically unloading his trailer, working with the efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. Boxes of medical supplies were being transferred to a large van parked behind the building, out of sight from the highway. Norbert stood near the truck supervising the operation, speaking quietly into a handheld radio. He'd removed his winter coat, revealing tactical-style clothing and equipment that had nothing to do with county road maintenance. This was a professional crew conducting a planned robbery, not opportunistic thieves taking advantage of a stranded driver. "How much longer?" Norbert called to the men unloading the trailer. 20 minutes, one of them replied. "Pharmaceuticals are in the front section, medical equipment in the back. Street values probably close to what we expected." "Good. Weather Service says the storm's going to last until morning. That gives us plenty of time to finish here and move the cargo to the distribution point." Elmer absorbed this information while fighting to control his breathing and heart rate. These thieves had planned their operation around the weather forecast, using the blizzard as cover for their robbery. They'd positioned themselves to intercept stranded trucks, probably monitoring police and emergency frequencies to identify targets. The building was cold, but not freezing, suggesting some kind of heating system was still functional. Through a grimy window, Elmer could see that snow was still falling heavily, accumulating several inches on the building's windowsill since his capture. Jake appeared in the doorway, stamping snow off his boots. "Driver's still out cold. How long does that stun gun usually keep them down?" "Depends on the person," Norbert replied. "Big guy like him, maybe another hour. Doesn't matter, by then we'll be finished here." "What do we do with him after?" Norbert was quiet for a moment before answering. "Same thing we did with the last one. Can't leave witnesses who can identify us." The casual discussion of murder sent ice through Elmer's veins. These weren't just cargo thieves. They were killers who eliminated anyone who could testify against them. His survival depended on escaping before they finished unloading his truck. Elmer remained motionless as Jake approached to check on him. The younger man knelt beside him and roughly shook his shoulder, testing for consciousness. Elmer let his body remain limp, breathing slowly and keeping his eyes closed. "Still unconscious," Jake reported. "Want me to tie him up better?" "No point. He's not going anywhere in this storm, and will be done soon enough." Jake returned to the unloading operation, leaving Elmer alone in the building. This was his chance to assess his restraints and look for escape options. The zip ties around his wrists were tight, but not impossible to break if he could find something sharp to cut them. More concerning was his physical condition. The stun gun had left him weak and disoriented, and the cold was already affecting his coordination. Through the window, he could see that his truck was still running, its engine idling to keep the air brakes operational. If he could reach the truck and get it moving, he might be able to escape even with damaged steering and a loaded trailer. But first, he had to get out of the building without being detected. Elmer rolled quietly toward the back wall of the building, using the shadows to conceal his movement. Near the rear corner, he found what he was looking for, a section where the concrete had cracked and weathered, creating sharp edges that could cut through plastic restraints. Working carefully to avoid making noise, he began sawing the zip ties against the rough concrete. The process was slow and painful, cutting into his wrists as well as the restraints, but gradually the plastic began to weaken. Outside, he could hear Norbert coordinating the operation with a military precision. "Temperature's dropping fast. Finish loading the pharmaceuticals and secure the van. We move out in 15 minutes. What about the truck?" "Leave it. When they find it in the spring, it'll look like the driver tried to walk out in the storm and died of exposure. Happens every winter up here." The zip ties finally separated, freeing Elmer's hands. Blood flowed back into his fingers, bringing painful tingling as circulation returned. He flexed his hands carefully, testing his grip strength and coordination. Now came the difficult part, escaping from the building without being seen or heard. The rear wall had a small window that appeared to be painted shut. If he could open it quietly, he might be able to slip out the back while the thieves were focused on the truck. But any noise would alert them to his escape attempt. Elmer examined the window more carefully. The paint was old and cracked, and the frame showed signs of warping from decades of temperature changes. With careful pressure, he might be able to force it open. Using his shirt to muffle the sound, he began working on the window frame. The paint cracked away in small flakes, and the frame shifted slightly under pressure. After several minutes of patient work, the window opened with a barely audible squeak. Cold air and snow immediately flooded through the opening. The temperature outside was well below zero, and the wind was still howling across the exposed mountainside. Escaping into that environment without proper clothing would be suicide, but staying in the building meant certain death. Elmer squeezed through the window opening, dropping into snow that was knee-deep behind the building. The cold cut through his coveralls immediately, and he knew hypothermia would become a serious threat within minutes. But he was free, at least temporarily. The building sat on a small plateau carved into the mountainside, with his truck positioned about 50 yards away. Between his position and the truck, 2 men were finishing the transfer of cargo from his trailer to their van. If he could reach his truck without being detected, he might be able to drive away even with the trailer damage. The freightliner was still running, and the theft crew had left the driver's door unlocked while they worked. Elmer began working his way around the building, using the storm as cover. The blowing snow reduced visibility to a few yards, which helped conceal his movement, but also made navigation difficult. As he approached his truck, he could hear one of the thieves talking on a radio. "Base, this is Team 2. Cargo transfer is complete. Moving to secondary location as planned." "Copy, Team 2. What's the status of the driver?" still unconscious. Norbert's handling disposal. The term disposal left no doubt about what they intended to do with him. These men had killed before, and they would kill again to protect their operation. Elmer reached the passenger side of his truck and carefully opened the door. The cab was warm and dry, a refuge from the storm that was becoming increasingly violent. But more importantly, it was his escape vehicle if he could get it moving. He climbed into the driver's seat and assessed the truck's condition. The engine was running smoothly, and the air pressure gauges showed normal readings. The trailer was damaged and would be difficult to control, but the truck itself appeared functional. The problem was getting away without being seen or caught. Norbert and his crew were experienced criminals who wouldn't be caught off guard easily. If Elmer tried to drive away, they would pursue him in their own vehicles, and a chase through mountain terrain and blizzard conditions would likely end in disaster. But he had one advantage they probably hadn't considered: intimate knowledge of how commercial vehicles operated under extreme conditions. Elmer quietly engaged the truck's differential lock and shifted into the lowest gear range. Then he activated the engine brake and prepared to release the parking brake. If he could get the truck moving before they realized what was happening, the weight and momentum of an 80,000-pound vehicle would make him very difficult to stop. Through his side mirror, he could see Jake approaching the cab with a flashlight, probably coming to check on the truck's engine. This was the moment of decision. Act now or lose his chance forever. Elmer released the parking brake and pressed the accelerator. The Freightliner lurched forward with a growl of diesel power, its damaged trailer scraping against the guardrail as it began moving down the mountain highway. Jake dove aside as the truck passed him, shouting warnings to his partners. In his mirrors, Elmer could see men running toward the vehicles parked behind the building. Within seconds, they would be in pursuit, and the real test of survival would begin. But for the first time since his capture, Elmer felt a spark of hope. He was mobile, armed with 40 tons of steel and diesel power, and heading downhill toward civilization. The thieves had made one crucial mistake. They'd left a professional driver in control of a professional vehicle. The chase was about to begin, and Elmer intended to make it memorable. Elmer Blackwood's Freightliner plowed through the deepening snow as it descended Wolf Creek Pass, its damaged trailer swaying behind it like a wounded animal. In his mirrors, he could see headlights pursuing him. At least 2 vehicles, possibly 3, their high-performance engines giving them a significant advantage over his heavy truck in the treacherous conditions. The blizzard showed no signs of abating. Snow was falling so heavily that his wipers could barely keep the windshield clear, and the wind gusts were strong enough to rock his cab despite the truck's considerable weight. Visibility was measured in yards rather than miles, turning the mountain highway into a tunnel of swirling white. Elmer's CB radio crackled with transmissions from his pursuers. They weren't bothering to use codes or concealment, apparently confident that no law enforcement was monitoring the frequencies in these conditions. Target vehicle is approximately 1 mile ahead. Norbert's voice came through clearly. Trailer damage is slowing him down. We should be able to overtake within 10 minutes. What's the plan when we catch him? Jake's younger voice responded. Force him off the road. The storm will cover our tracks, and it'll look like he lost control in the weather. Elmer keyed his CB microphone, knowing they were monitoring his frequency. Norbert, this is Elmer. You boys might want to reconsider this chase. Mountain driving in a blizzard isn't a game. Driver, you've caused us considerable inconvenience. Stop your vehicle now and we might let you walk away. Walk away into a blizzard at 10,000 feet? That's not much of an offer. It's the only offer you're going to get. The pursuing vehicles were gaining rapidly. Through his mirrors, Elmer could see their headlights growing brighter despite the storm. They were driving aggressively, probably using all-wheel drive vehicles designed for mountain conditions. Elmer's truck, on the other hand, was struggling with the combination of steep grades, ice-covered pavement, and a damaged trailer that was affecting his steering. His maximum safe speed was perhaps 35 miles per hour, while his pursuers could probably maintain 50 or more. At mile marker 145, the inevitable happened. A dark pickup truck pulled alongside his cab, its passenger window rolling down to reveal a man pointing what appeared to be a rifle at Elmer's driving position. Elmer yanked his steering wheel to the left, forcing the pickup to swerve toward the guardrail to avoid collision. The maneuver bought him a few seconds, but it also demonstrated that his pursuers were willing to use deadly force to stop him. His CB radio crackled again. "Next time, we won't miss." Norbert's voice was calm and professional. "Pull over now." Instead of responding, Elmer switched to the emergency channel and began broadcasting a distress call. "Mayday, Mayday, this is commercial vehicle on Highway 160 eastbound, mile marker 145. I'm being pursued by armed subjects attempting to stop my vehicle. Request immediate law enforcement assistance." Static answered him. The storm was interfering with radio communications, and even if someone received his transmission, help was hours away in these conditions. The pickup truck was maneuvering for another attack, this time approaching from the right side where it would have a clear shot at his fuel tanks. If they punctured his diesel tanks, his truck would be immobilized within minutes. Elmer made a desperate decision. Instead of trying to avoid the pickup, he turned toward it, using his truck's superior weight and momentum as weapons. The Freightliner's bumper caught the pickup's rear quarter panel, sending the smaller vehicle spinning into the guardrail with the screech of tearing metal. In his mirror, Elmer saw the pickup slide sideways and come to rest against the barrier, steam rising from its damaged radiator. One pursuer down, but others were still closing fast. A second vehicle, a large SUV, was now approaching from behind. This driver was more cautious, maintaining distance while waiting for an opportunity to strike. Through his rear-view mirror, Elmer could see muzzle flashes as someone in the SUV opened fire on his trailer. The bullets sparked off his truck's rear doors, and Elmer heard the distinctive hiss of escaping air as one of his trailer tires was punctured. The damaged tire began shredding immediately, sending vibrations through his truck and making steering even more difficult. "You're just making this harder on yourself." Norbert's voice came through the CB. "Stop now, and we'll make it quick." Elmer ignored the transmission and focused on the highway ahead. The grade was becoming steeper as he descended toward the valley floor, and his speed was increasing despite his efforts to control it with engine braking. The combination of ice, damaged tires, and a swaying trailer was pushing his truck to the edge of controllability. At mile marker 140, Elmer saw something that offered a slim chance of escape. A chain-up area where trucks could safely pull off the highway to install tire chains. More importantly, it was positioned at the top of a particularly steep section, where his pursuers would have to slow down significantly. If he could reach the chain-up area without losing control, he might be able to use the terrain to his advantage. Elmer began downshifting rapidly, using his transmission and engine brake to shed speed while maintaining directional control. The Freightliner slowed from 40 miles per hour to 25, then to 20 as he approached the chain-up area. The SUV behind him was forced to slow as well, its driver apparently realizing that a high-speed chase down a 7% grade in blizzard conditions was suicide for everyone involved. Elmer swung his truck into the chain-up area just as a third vehicle appeared in his mirrors, another pickup truck that had been hidden behind the SUV. This one was moving much faster than the others, its driver apparently willing to take risks that the others wouldn't. As the new pickup truck roared past the slower SUV, Elmer realized he was looking at a fatal mistake. The pickup was traveling at least 50 miles per hour on a grade that was covered with ice and snow. Physics was about to teach its driver a harsh lesson about winter mountain driving. The pickup lost control exactly where Elmer expected it would, at the point where the grade increased from 5% to 7%. Its rear wheels lost traction first, causing the vehicle to begin sliding sideways. The driver overcorrected, sending the pickup into a violent spin that ended when it struck the guardrail and flipped over the side of the mountain. Elmer watched in his mirror as the pickup tumbled down the steep slope, its headlights cartwheeling through the darkness before disappearing into the storm. No one could have survived that crash. The SUV had stopped at the top of the steep section, its driver apparently deciding that pursuing Elmer wasn't worth dying for. Through his CB radio, Elmer could hear Norbert coordinating with his remaining crew. "Fall back to checkpoint 2, Norbert ordered. "We'll intercept him at the bottom of the pass." Elmer realized with growing dread that his escape had only bought him temporary freedom. Norbert's crew had obviously planned for various contingencies, including the possibility that a target might flee down the mountain. They had additional people positioned at strategic points along the highway. But he also realized something else. The storm was working in his favor as much as theirs. The blizzard that had trapped him initially was now providing cover for his escape. If he could stay ahead of his pursuers until he reached civilization, he might be able to find help. The descent continued for another 10 miles, with Elmer fighting to control his damaged truck on increasingly treacherous roads. The trailer tire that had been shot was completely shredded now, and the wheel was running on the rim, sending showers of sparks into the night. At mile marker 125, Elmer saw lights ahead. Not the headlights of pursuing vehicles, but the stationary glow of buildings. A small community sat in the valley below, its windows warm and welcoming against the storm. But as he approached the town, Elmer's hope turned to fear. 2 vehicles were parked across the highway, blocking both lanes and forcing him to stop. Norbert's crew had anticipated his route and positioned themselves to complete the trap. Elmer brought his truck to a halt about 100 yards from the roadblock, his engine idling as he considered his rapidly diminishing options. Behind him, the SUV had resumed pursuit and was now closing the gap. Ahead, armed men were taking positions around the blocking vehicles. His CB radio crackled with Norbert's voice, now carrying a tone of finality. "End of the line, driver. Get out of the truck with your hands visible, and we'll make this quick." But as Elmer stared at the roadblock ahead, he noticed something that Norbert's crew had apparently missed. Behind the blocking vehicles, the warm lights of the small town were clearly visible, and one of those lights was moving. Someone was coming. A vehicle was approaching from the town, probably a local resident investigating the commotion on the highway. For the first time since his capture, Elmer felt a surge of genuine hope. Help was coming even if it didn't know it yet. The question was whether he could stay alive long enough for that help to matter. Elmer Blackwood sat in his idling Freightliner, trapped between Norbert's roadblock ahead and the pursuing SUV behind, watching the single set of headlights approach from the small mountain town. The vehicle was moving slowly through the storm, probably driven by a local resident who was curious about the unusual activity on the highway. That innocent driver was about to become either Elmer's salvation or another victim of Norbert's criminal organization. Through his CB radio, Elmer could hear Norbert coordinating with his crew. Unknown vehicle approaching from the south, single occupant, probably local. Jake, intercept and handle it quietly. Copy. Want me to turn them around or deal with them permanently? Depends on what they see. Use your judgment. Elmer keyed his microphone, broadcasting on the emergency channel. Unknown vehicle approaching Highway 160 roadblock. This is a commercial driver. Armed subjects have blocked the highway. Do not approach. Repeat, do not approach. But his warning was lost in the static of the storm. The approaching vehicle continued toward the roadblock, apparently unaware of the danger ahead. As the headlights drew closer, Elmer could see it was an older pickup truck, probably driven by someone who'd lived in these mountains long enough to navigate them in any weather. The vehicle stopped about 50 yards from the roadblock and its driver got out. Even through the blowing snow, Elmer could see it was a woman. Elderly, wearing a heavy winter coat and moving with the careful steps of someone accustomed to icy conditions. She approached one of the blocking vehicles, apparently intending to ask questions about the situation. Jake emerged from behind an SUV, weapon drawn but concealed behind his back. "Ma'am, you need to turn around and go back to town. Highway's closed due to weather conditions." The woman studied the scene carefully. The blocking vehicles, the men taking cover behind them, and Elmer's damaged truck in the distance. Even at her age, she was sharp enough to recognize that this wasn't an official highway closure. "I'm Gladys Patterson," she said in a voice that carried clearly through the storm. "Been living in this valley for 67 years, and I've never seen county workers block the highway without proper signage and emergency lighting." Jake moved closer, his weapon now partially visible. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your vehicle and leave the area immediately. And I'm going to have to ask you boys what you're really doing out here in the middle of a blizzard." Gladys Patterson was either very brave or completely unaware of her danger. She stood her ground despite being confronted by an armed man, studying the situation with the keen eyes of someone who'd seen enough of life to recognize trouble when she encountered it. Norbert's voice crackled over the radio. "Jake, handle the situation. We don't have time for complications." But before Jake could act, Gladys made a move that surprised everyone. Instead of retreating to her truck, she pulled out what appeared to be a cell phone and began taking pictures of the roadblock, the men, and their vehicles. "Gladys Patterson, you put that phone away right now," Jake commanded, raising his weapon to a threatening position. "Young man, I've been documenting unusual activities in this county for the newspaper for 40 years. This certainly qualifies as unusual." Elmer realized he was witnessing something remarkable. This elderly woman wasn't intimidated by armed criminals. She was treating them like a story to be investigated and reported. Her courage was both inspiring and potentially fatal. From his truck, Elmer began flashing his headlights and sounding his air horn, trying to create enough commotion to alert Gladys to the true nature of her danger. The sound echoed across the valley, loud enough to be heard over the storm. Gladys looked toward Elmer's truck, apparently recognizing his signals as a distress call. She raised her phone again, this time pointing it toward his position and taking more photographs. "That's a commercial vehicle in distress," she called to Jake. "Are you providing assistance or preventing it?" Jake was clearly out of his depth. He'd been trained to handle truck drivers and cargo theft, not elderly newspaper correspondents who asked uncomfortable questions. His weapon was still drawn, but he seemed reluctant to use it against such an unlikely opponent. Norbert's patience finally ran out. "Jake, eliminate the witness and finish this operation." But Gladys had heard the radio transmission and her expression changed from curiosity to alarm. She finally understood the true nature of the situation she'd stumbled into. Instead of fleeing, she did something that caught everyone off guard. She pressed a button on her phone and began speaking into it. "This is Gladys Patterson calling in a Code 3 emergency on Highway 160, mile marker 125. Multiple armed subjects have established an illegal roadblock and are threatening a commercial vehicle and civilian personnel. Request immediate law enforcement and emergency medical response." Elmer felt a surge of hope. Gladys wasn't just taking pictures. She was connected to emergency services, probably through a direct line to the county sheriff's department. Her 67 years in the valley had apparently taught her how to report dangerous situations effectively. Jake lunged toward Gladys, trying to grab her phone, but the elderly woman was more agile than she appeared. She stepped aside, letting Jake's momentum carry him past her, then continued her emergency report. "Suspects are armed with rifles and appear to be conducting a robbery operation. Commercial vehicle shows signs of damage consistent with pursuit and attack." Norbert realized the situation was spiraling out of control. All units abort operation, return to vehicles, and evacuate immediately. But Gladys wasn't finished. As Norbert's crew began moving toward their escape vehicles, she photographed their license plates, their faces, and their weapons. The amateur newspaper correspondent was conducting a professional crime scene documentation. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the storm, multiple vehicles responding from different directions. Gladys's emergency call had triggered a coordinated law enforcement response that was converging on the roadblock from all available routes. Norbert made a final, desperate decision. Instead of fleeing, he drew his weapon and aimed it directly at Gladys. "Old woman, you've interfered with the wrong people." But Elmer had been waiting for exactly this moment. With Norbert's attention focused on Gladys, he released his truck's air brakes and pressed the accelerator. The Freightliner lurched forward, its damaged trailer swaying as it accelerated toward the roadblock. 40 tons of steel and momentum was bearing down on the blocking vehicles at 30 miles per hour. Norbert's crew scattered as the massive truck smashed through their roadblock, sending their SUVs spinning aside like toys. Norbert himself dove for cover as Elmer's truck roared past, its air horn blasting a victory call that echoed across the mountain valley. The Freightliner skidded to a stop beyond the roadblock, its engine steaming and its trailer finally giving up the fight against further abuse. But Elmer was through, safe and alive. Behind him, law enforcement vehicles were surrounding the scattered remnants of Norbert's crew. The Colorado State Patrol, county sheriff's deputies, and even federal agents responding to reports of organized cargo theft were taking suspects into custody with professional efficiency. Gladys Patterson walked toward Elmer's truck, still taking photographs and apparently unfazed by her close encounter with armed criminals. When Elmer climbed down from his cab, she greeted him with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd just witnessed another interesting story for her newspaper. "You all right, young man? Looked like you had quite an adventure up on the pass." "Yes, ma'am, thanks to you. If you hadn't shown up when you did, 67 years in these mountains teaches you to recognize trouble when you see it. Those boys weren't from around here, and they certainly weren't county workers." As emergency medical technicians checked Elmer for injuries and investigators began processing the crime scene, the full scope of Norbert's operation became clear. The cargo theft ring had been operating throughout the Rocky Mountain region for over 2 years, targeting trucks stranded by weather and using fake emergency scenarios to rob drivers. "How many trucks did they hit?" Elmer asked the lead investigator. "Preliminary count is 14 confirmed robberies, with total losses exceeding $8 million. But we suspect there were more incidents that were never connected to an organized operation." "What about the drivers?" The investigator's expression darkened. 3 are confirmed dead. 2 more are still missing and presumed dead. You and another driver who escaped in Utah are the only survivors we know about." The magnitude of Norbert's crimes was staggering. This wasn't just cargo theft. It was systematic murder disguised as weather-related accidents. Elmer realized how close he'd come to becoming another statistic, another driver who had disappeared during a mountain storm. Norbert himself was captured attempting to flee on foot through the storm. Hypothermia and exhaustion had reduced the confident criminal mastermind to a desperate fugitive who was barely conscious when searchers found him. As he was loaded into an ambulance under guard, Norbert caught sight of Elmer watching from beside his truck. Even defeated and facing life in prison, there was no remorse in his expression, only the cold calculation of a predator who'd been outmaneuvered by his intended prey. "You got lucky," Norbert said as he was wheeled past. "Next time, you won't have an old lady to save you." "There won't be a next time," Elmer replied. "You're finished." Gladys Patterson overheard the exchange and approached Norbert's stretcher with her camera ready. "Young man, I've been covering crime stories for 40 years, And I can tell you that people like you always think they're smarter than everyone else. That's usually what gets them caught." She took one final photograph of Norbert before the ambulance doors closed. The image would become the front page story in the next edition of the Mountain Valley's weekly newspaper, along with Gladys's detailed account of the night she helped stop a criminal organization that had terrorized truck drivers throughout the region. 3 hours later, as dawn broke over the Colorado mountains, Elmer was finally able to contact his dispatcher and report his situation. The storm was clearing, emergency crews were working to reopen the highway, and a heavy wrecker was en route to recover his damaged truck. "Continental Medical Transport, this is Unit 23 reporting in." The familiar voice of his company dispatcher came through clearly. "Unit 23, we've been worried sick. What's your status?" "Cargo secure, driver safe, truck damaged but repairable." It's been quite a night. As Elmer sat in the passenger seat of a state patrol car, warming up and waiting for the wrecker to arrive, he found himself thinking about the series of events that had led to his survival. The storm that had trapped him had also provided cover for his escape. The criminals who'd tried to kill him had underestimated the courage of an elderly woman with a camera and a sense of civic duty. Most importantly, his own experience and determination had carried him through a situation that had claimed the lives of other drivers. The Brotherhood of the Road had protected him in the form of Gladys Patterson, a local resident who'd risked her life to help a stranger in trouble. The winter trap had closed around him, but it had ultimately closed around his hunters instead. Norbert's organization was destroyed, its members facing decades in prison, and the highways were safer for every truck driver who would travel them in the future. As the wrecker began the delicate process of extracting his freightliner from the snow, Elmer made a mental note to send Gladys Patterson the largest flower arrangement he could find. Heroes came in all forms, and sometimes they were 67-year-old newspaper correspondents who weren't afraid to stand up to armed criminals in the middle of a mountain blizzard. The road ahead was clear, and Elmer was ready to travel it.